The story begins when two knights captured and brought the protagonist to Emperor Persilian. The girl was extremely frightened. It is further recalled that 3 months ago, a plague broke out and people were forbidden to go out and have contact with each other. Despite all the prohibitions, the girl went to the store and was hit by a car. This was the beginning of her new life. The main character woke up in a dark and dusty well, and that's when she realized that she wasn't dead. Panic gripped her and she began to call for help, hoping that someone would hear her and save her. At the young girl's scream came a group of frightened people with pitchforks and shovels in their hands. They pulled the girl out and started asking her silly questions. Our heroine did not answer them, for she could not speak properly when she saw her reflection in the puddle. It was not her body. The girl at first thought it was only a dream. She began to pinch herself, but there was no awakening. After a while, she realized that this was the first time she had heard such language from people that she could easily understand. She felt that God had taken pity on her and given her a second chance at life. The girl decided to start a new life and take a new name, introducing herself to others as Ellen Fiella Rus de Morcia Irene. People nicknamed the girl Liffy. The villagers told Liffy that an angry man had hit her on the head and thrown her into a well. There was also a theory that she was thrown into the well first, where she hit her head on the concrete as she fell. But all hypotheses led to the conclusion that she had injured her head. Liffy had a new life in the village, but she still had nothing to do. One day, while wandering around town, she came across an interesting story. Two people were discussing the plot of a book they had read. Ellen Fiella heard them say that Emperor Persilian often sees Princess Regina and is going to marry her. The girl intervened in the conversation and asked for more details about the story, for these two were characters in her favorite novel. Next, we are introduced to the elegant but insistent on her own Princess Cyril von Regina and the tyrant Emperor Persilian, who was quite gentle and kind to his companion. The love story of the emperor and the princess was Liffy's favorite storyline. These two were truly a fantastic couple, created by the heavens themselves. The girl was glad that she had fallen into this particular story. Thanks to the fact that Liffy knew the plot of the book and remembered everything in the smallest details, she decided to change her life and the lives of people around her. She became a street fortune teller who predicted people's future. Rumors of the fortune teller quickly spread throughout the state, and before conquering an entire empire, she was dragged to the imperial palace. Liffy bowed to the emperor as the knights had taught her, and then introduced herself to the emperor by her full name. His Majesty Persilian asked her if she understood her guilt. The girl became nervous after this question. In response to the emperor, a terrified Ellen Fiella shouted that she would never again predict about the fate of the imperial family, Princess Cyril Regina, and the Marquis of Sped. The girl was visibly upset, as her earnings were held by the storyline of these characters, and after the promise she had made, she could be out of a job. Persilian was surprised at what he heard, for only a narrow circle of people knew about it. The emperor concluded that the guest had a great deal of information about his life. Liffy agreed that she knew quite a few things about Persilian's life. All this time, Liffy had been talking to the ruler through the curtain through which she could see the silhouette of a tall man, and she had no way of knowing where she was hearing a child's voice coming from. When the curtain moved, Liff expected to see her favorite character from the novel, but she saw another Persilian de Eckhart, looking like a 4-year-old child. She didn't understand why he was so small, for she remembered him from the novel as big and handsome. His Majesty asked the fortune teller Liffy when he would be able to return to his former state, and the question threw her into a stupor. Ellen Fiella recalled in horror that in one part of the novel, the young emperor had disappeared. She had thought it was because Persilian was not the protagonist and was simply an unimportant character, but only now did she realize that his curse and his disappearance were connected. Not waiting for an answer to his questions, little Emperor Persilian ordered his knights to kill the useless fortune teller. One of them drew his and his sword, and a feeling of fear reached the girl. Terrified of death, the young lady shouted that she could help Pensilon get rid of the curse, but it would have to take enough time. The young emperor gave her 5 seconds to think and began to curl her fingers. At the last seconds, the girl expressed that she and the emperor needed to be together and then she could solve his problem. The ruler could not immediately trust the fortune teller and decided to double-check her words, asking her to prove their truthfulness. Fiella noted that Persilian had a great number of people who did not like him. The knight confirmed the fortune teller's words and reminded the emperor that aristocrats had been behaving rather strangely lately. Persilian thought for a moment. Liffey also confidently told His Majesty the details of his secret meeting with Princess Regina that she had once read about in a novel. From the emperor's reaction, she realized that she had hit the mark. Fiella Roos added that she knew of the gifts given to Cyril, of the conversations that had taken place between them, but she had never told the people about it, as she did not want to talk about His Majesty's private life in public. These facts about that very meeting were known only to the one accompanying knight. After hearing the most intimate facts of her personal life, a surprised Persilian interrupted the fortune teller and realized that she could be trusted. He added that she should resolve the curse as soon as possible, otherwise a bleak future awaited her. A bond of trust had been established between the emperor and Fiella. Liffey had peace of mind that her life was no longer in danger. In the palace, Liffey was assigned an adjoining room from the emperor, where Knight Millard informed her that she was the second person to know of His Majesty's condition. She is now the emperor's closest person. Knight Millard explained the situation at the palace in detail. He said that Persilian had been in such a terrible state for 10 days now. Doctors and priests had come to his aid, but none of them had been able to help him. All those who came to the emperor were given a medicine that erased their memory for a couple of hours, and local wizards were forbidden to enter the imperial palace at all. The ban on entry wasn't because the memory loss cure didn't work on wizards, but the situation was actually more confusing. Before the curse, Persilian was the best wizard in the empire, and he could not trust his health to other worse wizards. The emperor and courtiers have a hunch that the cousin of the previous ruler, Archduchess Dipka, and her wizards, whose entrance is forbidden, are involved in the whole situation. Millard told Liffey that Lady Dipka is in charge of the magic tower, which is why the emperor couldn't turn to the local wizards. He also added that after the curse, His Majesty could no longer use his magical powers. It is further revealed that the young emperor discovered his abilities at the age of 9. Liffey concludes that it is necessary to wait 5 years for the 4-year-old emperor to regain his abilities. Fiella convinces Millard that they won't have to wait that long, as she showed up at the palace to help with the tragedy as soon as possible. Millard doesn't trust the fortune teller, but in spite of that, he decided to share his guesses about the curse with her. He informed his interlocutor that all suspicions fall on the Archduchess's tower, since neither she nor the wizards have been seen lately. Perhaps they simply don't know when the curse was supposed to manifest. Liffey learns from the knight that the government is trying to solve all the issues of the curse, but the abrupt cancellation of all official meetings and events has caused distrust among the nobles. In addition, servants have not been allowed near the emperor for 10 days, which is also starting to be chattered about. The knight also said that His Majesty had many enemies, because the procedure for ascending the throne was extremely broken. Persilian ascended the throne by killing 4 brothers and sisters. The emperor in office at the time, left alone with Persilian, suddenly felt ill and died of cardiac arrest. His Majesty said there must be a clue in the palace, and Millard thinks there's something hidden in the palace that amplifies the curse. Liffey has promised to find it. Liffey pretended to try to discern the reason for the curse. Sir told her that Persilian had decided to announce to everyone that he was taking a vacation. During that time, she needs to get him back to normal. Persilian, Millard, and Fiella went out into the emperor's garden to try and find the cursed item. The garden had not been cared for in a long time, as the place had belonged to the past emperor. The emperor began furiously knocking over flower pots and breaking everything he saw in his path. Liffey wanted to help him, but he ordered her to search for the lining with her superpowers. Suddenly, someone's footsteps were heard in the vicinity of the garden. Liffey abruptly hid the little emperor behind her back from the eyes of the uninvited guest. Sir Millard was furious that someone dared to come without His Majesty's permission. Archduchess Dipke von Didius happened to be in the garden and heard the disruptive noise. She was outraged at what was happening in the greenhouse. She explained that she was in a hurry to save her brother Philip's garden from possible destruction. Liffey looked at her mistress in horror and remembered that the title of Archduchess can only be held by one person in the empire right now, and he stands before her. That person is the cousin of the previous emperor. The Duchess's entourage offered to voice their displeasure to the emperor, but she refused, citing rumors of the difficult state of affairs in the palace. Mrs. Dipke believes that young Persilian is very busy with the affairs of the empire, and he should not add more trouble. The Archduchess approached Liffey with questions about what was going on. Liffey gave no explanation, but only tried to put the cursed emperor behind her back. The lady realized that the destruction of the imperial greenhouse was the work of the child hiding behind the stranger's back, and asked him to answer for his actions. The Archduchess asked the girl to let her speak to the child, but she would not allow her to do so. Ellen Fiella stood up for the emperor and took the blame. Suddenly, a courtier's voice interrupted her, informing her that Liffey was a famous street fortune teller. Mrs. Dipke was in a state of confusion, for she did not understand the purpose of the fortune teller's presence in the emperor's palace. She asked Liffey to show the child hiding behind her back. After a long hesitation, the girl showed Persilian. The lady did not recognize him as the ruler. However, her attendant recognized the child's imperial features. Persilian hugged the fortune teller and said that he was very scared. Liffey decided to take charge of the situation and told the audience that this was Perry, His Majesty's illegitimate son, and she was here to replace his dead mother. The Archduchess and her assistant concluded that for 10 days now, the emperor had been busy taking care of his son, so he had stopped attending any events or making contact. The Duchess bowed to the prince, and before leaving, she promised him to come back next time and told him to grow strong, for he couldn't survive in this place if he was weak. It seems that she had nothing to do with the emperor's curse. Liffey was pleased that she had saved the emperor. However, Persilian, sitting in the foreteller's arms, told her that he saw a scene of someone slitting her neck. A terrifying image of the coming threat arose in Liffey's mind. We are next introduced to Viscount Yorser, who was interested in the sudden appearance of the prince in the palace. He concludes that the emperor has given a lot of power to his son. During the emperor's absence, internal affairs were handled by the nobles, but with the appearance of the prince, things became different. The Viscount plans to spend more time around Perry to fulfill his bad intentions and partially run the empire, for all powers now lie in the hands of the heir. The Viscount can't miss such a great opportunity to lead the empire. He began to prepare for a future meeting with the prince and decided to get busy with a gift for him. 5 days later, Yorser came to visit His Majesty the Prince and brought him a gift. However, the latter angrily threw the toy aside and sent the uninvited aristocrat away. Liffey decides to take advantage of the situation and advises his guest to bring gifts set with a pink diamond. The frustrated Viscount, pursuing his devious plans, does not understand how he can raise the money for such expensive gifts. Persilian was angry at the fortune teller's mercantilism. Liffey was not embarrassed by his anger, for after that situation in the greenhouse, the emperor had already vented all his anger on her. This was nothing new to her. The nobles and servants were spreading rumors that the prince would suffer a sad fate because he had been born through the illicit liaisons of a wretched girl and the emperor. Liffey told her entourage that when it was discovered that Perry was the son of the tyrant emperor, his mother was worried and decided to hide as far away from the palace as possible. According to legend, Liffey witnessed the death of Prince Perry's mother, who often visited their family. Left alone with the child, Liffey couldn't bear it and decided to bring him to his father's palace. Emperor Persilian was angry with Ellen Fiella for now having a son by his supposedly dead lover. This made the ruler irresponsible in the eyes of the people, for he had failed to look after his beloved. Liffey rebuked the emperor for worrying about Princess Regina. She later told His Majesty that Cyril would be able to help him after her return. These words confused the emperor, and he thought that Liffey was refusing to help him. Persilian reminded the fortune teller to hurry up and deal with the curse. for if she failed, her head would float away separately from her on the boat. Unexpectedly, a servant brought the emperor a message from the Archduchess, in which she informed him of the appointment of a ceremony to welcome Prince Perry. Persilian did not like this news. Knight Millard said that Emperor Persilian would be introduced as Prince Perry and needed extra protection from the people. Percy said that Millard's strength would be enough for him, but he disagreed and decided to find additional protection. When Persilian was an adult, he was considered the best wizard in the empire, and even despite the nobles' anger, he was able to survive. However, now he is a 4-year-old prince who hasn't even had his magic awakened yet. Therefore, if something goes wrong, it is necessary to have the necessary protection in the person of someone. It was known that the ruler trusted no man, so Ellen Fiella decided to take the emperor's defense into her own hands, to which he had no objections. Even so, Persilian asked Millard to find him an escort. In the case of the emperor's absence, all the documents of the empire assigned all powers to the prince. Both the nobles and the people of the empire disagreed with this, as everyone knew that Prince Perry had grown up outside of the imperial palace. Before taking a position completely contrary to the emperor's document, it was decided that at the nobles' council everyone would unite. Archduchess Dipka decided to organize a whole celebration in the capital to welcome the prince as a true and faithful servant of the empire. It was clear that all the nobles would agree to a solemn ceremony from Archduchess Dipka. However, the intent of the ceremony was obvious to everyone. Instead of sincerely welcoming the prince, everyone just wanted to take possession of the prince and scoop up all the affairs of state. During the preparations for the feast, the palace was in chaos. All the servants were fussing over the little prince and trying to find an outfit to suit his tastes. Persilian didn't want to look cute, but Liffey had convinced him that cuteness was his strongest weapon. The girl explained to the emperor that in this difficult time, all the aristocrats want to get hold of the prince because they plan to lead the empire. However, Persilian's cuteness would be able to protect him from the hungry hyenas attacking him. The emperor gets angry and chases the assistant away. A couple days later, the long-awaited welcoming ceremony was officially opened. Among the nobles, it was attended by those who were loyal to the empire and the imperial family, and those who wanted to get rid of the imperial power. At the feast, Liffey had suggested to the ruler to make a good relationship with some of the nobles, but he was strongly against it, as nobles don't inspire his trust, nor do other people. Persilian had a deep-seated distrust of humans. That was why the only person close to him was Princess Regina. He used to be able to live thanks to his magical abilities, but now it would be good for him to find a helper. Persilian and Liffey's conversation was interrupted by one of the aristocrats. He said that they had prepared a small gift for him in honor of his welcome to the palace. Persilian gave a disgruntled look and refused the gift. Persilian was unhappy because of the nobles' overprotective behavior. He grudgingly asked them to take care of him while his father wasn't around. The prince was greeted by the Archduchess Dipka, who was extremely friendly to His Highness. She promised protection and help in case of any problems, for they are one family. Normally, a prince doesn't need nobles to help him. However, since it is a 4-year-old child, everyone decided that the Archduchess should fulfill the role of assistant. The prince refused help and wittily remarked to the grandmother Archduchess that she was unreliable in his eyes. He could take care of things himself without any help from anyone. Mrs. Dipka changed her face and left. At this time, the emperor notices that Sir Millard is throwing out of the palace one of the knights who injured his leg falling down the stairs. It was a knight who had previously been chosen to be the emperor's escort. Persilian decided to delve into the situation. The knight asked the prince if he would allow him to protect His Excellency's life. However, the little emperor noticed that the knight had changed his sword and was wary, but still allowed it. Next, Viscount Gulmovera arrived at Prince Perry's house and empathized with the young boy's difficult life. He reminded him that he had lost his mother early and was left abandoned by his father. The Viscount suggested to Persilian that he should call him Papa. Liffey and Persilian were surprised at such a suggestion and wanted to send the nobleman away. The Viscount insisted that he could be a strong support for him. Persilian was angry and asked for a sword and wanted to execute the man in public. All the nobles whispered that the apple had not fallen far from the tree, that the prince had followed in the footsteps of his tyrant father. In honor of the holiday, Liffey suggested that His Highness avoid bloodshed on such a day and forgive the Viscount. Persilian listened to her and devised a milder punishment for the Sir. Gulmover was to walk around all evening barking after every sentence he uttered, so that everyone present would know that he was talking nonsense. The tired emperor decided to go out for some fresh air on the balcony. Liffey wanted to leave Persilian alone, but he jealously forbade it, saying that without supervision, the aristocrats would rush in and she would spill her secrets to them. The ruler looked tired on the balcony, and Ellen Fiella suggested he go to his bedroom. Persilian was not happy that she was treating him like a child, but he agreed to her suggestion. As Liff and Persilian were leaving the balcony, they noticed the guard knight's sword glowing. There was an explosion, and Liff barely had time to cover the emperor with herself. The escort knight died on the spot. The soothsayer received a burn on her back. This frightened Persilian very much, and he carefully treated her wound. He was angry that the girl had not had time to dodge. Thanks to Officer Millard, it was learned that the cause of the explosion was a rock embedded in the hilt of the escort knight's sword. It was an attempted assassination of the Prince Emperor. Persilian concluded that someone had taken advantage of the magic that controlled the man's mind and put an explosive substance in the knight's sword. His Majesty did not understand why the girl he had taken captive ran to save him rather than herself when she was in danger. Liffey confessed that she was afraid of the consequences of her escape, and so she decided to take care of the emperor. The prince's welcome party ended in chaos. The nobles had a brief interrogation, and the wounded were treated in the palace. The mages from the magic tower inspected the scene, but still couldn't find the culprit. So it was decided to put soldiers in front of the palace for extra protection. After what happened, Liffey suggested that the emperor sleep in the same room because it increased his safety. They needed to be careful until they knew who was behind the explosion. He agreed. Liffey realized that her concern was now not only for her own fate, but also for the fate of the emperor, whose life had become important to her. She had reassessed her priorities and was now willing to give her all to ensure the emperor's safety and well-being. Liff was going to sleep on the floor, but Persilian beckoned her to lie next to him. That meant he trusted her. The next morning, guests with their children began to arrive at the palace. After the feast, all the nobles decided to introduce their daughters to the little prince. During the reception, the emperor told Ellen Fiella to go rest, even though she wanted to spend time with him. After the explosion, Persilian became very worried about the fortune-teller's injury. One of the nobles arrived at the prince's house with his daughter. The lovesick girl tried to get Perry's attention, but he was cold-blooded and didn't even look at her. Liffey tried to hold back her laughter at what was happening. The girl asked the prince which cookie she should eat, but Perry didn't care. The angry guest threw a cookie at the prince, unaware that the emperor himself was in front of her. Liffey managed to catch the flying cookie near Persilian's face. The emperor became angry and threw the uninvited guests out, reproaching the nobleman for not thinking of the consequences when he brought a small child to the meeting. At the same time, Percy asked all the nobles not to disturb him. Looking at the unhappy emperor, Liffey remembered that the book described that Persilian's childhood was similar to Cyril's. Cyril Regina had grown up in poor circumstances. She had lost her mother early, and because of that, she had lived with the Duke's family where she had been mistreated. Left alone, Persilian asked Liffey again about finding the cursed item and realized that she was doing nothing to find it. He shoved her out the door, and she left to run his errand. Going on a mission, Ellen Fiella crossed paths with the Archduchess's crony. He asked her to give His Highness important documents containing information about aristocratic knights who were candidates for escort. The Count told Liffey in confidence that the Archduchess had ordered him to give him this envelope, as she was very much worried about the life and health of the blood baby. At the end of the conversation, the Count gave the fortune teller a sapphire bracelet as a token of his gratitude for taking care of the prince. The girl concluded that the Duchess might have sent her men as guards for the prince on purpose and was wary of these documents, but she was touched by the expensive gift and so she could not refuse the Count's request. Liffey returned to the Emperor and informed him of the documents and the bribe. He was displeased and ordered her to bring the gift back. Persilian read the documents and realized that all these people on the list were supporters of the Archduchess. He told Millard not to take them for guard duty, as this situation was highly suspicious. After the bribe situation, Ellen Fiella wanted to escape from the palace, but realized it was impossible. The tyrant emperor would always be able to find her and kill her. So she came up with another plan. She decided to change the stern Persilian. She went to the kitchen to prepare various sweets for the emperor. While cooking, Liffey learned from the imperial servants that the atmosphere in the palace had not been good recently. This made her particularly suspicious. Liffey brought Persilian a tray of dessert. Showing his temper, the emperor refused to taste the treat at first. He sent his aide to get the papers, while he discreetly ate the pastry himself. This meant that Liff had completely gained his trust. In the days that followed, Liffey busied herself with the search for the cursed thing. One day she met Viscount Helenols, who invited her to dinner. He wanted to introduce her to his son in order to get closer to the prince. This was not the first time such an invitation had been made, for all the nobles wanted to be close to power. At the ceremony, everyone saw that the prince was unwavering, so now everyone had their sights set on her. Since Ellen Fiella has brought Prince Perry to the palace, they've been on good terms for a long time. The nobles believe that if they catch the fortune teller, they can get their hands on the prince. Liffey told Persilian everything. He was jealous of the offers and told the fortune teller to refuse them and to report to him any families that offered personal meetings. The emperor was worried that the chatty assistant could tell the nobles all the information about what was going on in the palace and the imperial family. He believed that the fortune teller's mouth was never closed. After speaking with His Majesty, Ellen Fiella went to the courtyard again, where she met Sir Millard. He told her that Emperor Persilian cared for her very much. For the sake of preserving her life and health, he had requested a personal escort. Liffey was pleased at the emperor's increased concern. Sir Millard also asked her to refrain from offers and personal meetings from aristocrats as much as possible. He subtly hinted that the emperor would thank her with a special reward after all this, so it was important for her to be patient. The young Mr. Castian von Haidar intervened in the conversation. He insistently suggested that the young girl spend some time alone with him. In the story Liffey read, Castian was a minor character who had deep feelings for the main character, Cyril. However, it was later revealed that the man was possessed. Despite this, Ellen Fiella interacted with him in love, showering him with compliments. In the conversation, it is learned that the members of the Haidar family are very loyal to the imperial family, and she is very worried about the peace in the palace after the unpleasant incident. It is known that Castian's family has always secretly helped the emperor. Castian asked Liffey to address any requests to him in case of any problems. He also said that as a child, he had been in the tower with His Majesty. They had been trained in magic together. The emperor had always ignored any attempts to form friendships with any of the students. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Castian conjured up a precious flower and handed it to the lovely lady. Liffey didn't understand why he was paying attention to her, because in the story of the novel, he was in love with Cyril. Millard rebuked the fortune teller for this meeting with Castianoi and for the newly received bribe. He also said that the Haidar family was not in close relations with the Archduchess. They were rather neutral, so there was nothing to worry about. Liffey returns to the palace and tells the emperor about the meeting. Persilian doesn't understand Castian's motives and goals, but he's sure it would be a good idea to start allying with him. Persilian told the aide that the Haidar family has friendly relations with the Archduchess. However, they are not very close. It's just that they help the imperial family together. When Persilian ascended to the throne, the Haidar family didn't mind much. Besides, they didn't take part in the noble council. This family is neutral. Before going to bed, Persilian remembered Castian again and began to ask his assistant about him. It was obvious that the emperor was jealous of Liffey, but he hid it. Liffey confessed that she actually sympathized with His Majesty. Persilian didn't understand why she was in love with him, for there was never any kindness on his part. but Liffey still found him very sweet and attractive. She explained her feelings by saying that she had once seen a prophecy that told her to love His Majesty. Persilian ignored her words, but it was obvious that they did not embarrass him. He pretended to fall asleep. About 10 days had passed since the welcoming ceremony. When Prince Perry became the official owner of the imperial palace, a guard was organized to protect the imperial family. Fiella continued her search for the enchanted item. All her attempts came to nothing. She realized that if Persilian found out about her lack of magic, he would kill her. So she had to find some kind of clue. The most suspicious person is the Archduchess Dipka, as she has always aspired to take the throne. The curse on the emperor could have been cast by someone with magical powers, so it is likely that the wizards in the tower who are supporters of Mrs. Dipka are involved. Another afternoon, young Liffey went to a tea party given by the Countess of Rowsley. The guests were upset that Miss had come without His Highness the Prince, for this could have been another attempt to introduce their daughters to Prince Perry and get closer to the throne. During the ceremony, Liffey tried to find out more information about Castian. The attendees told her that the young man was from a family of hereditary wizards. He had studied at the tower for a while, but then lost interest and went to be homeschooled. It is also learned that at the time of Persilian and Castian's studies, the Archduchess was the elder of the Magic Tower, due to the fact that she had long supported the tower in many ways. Liffey didn't understand why Dipka hadn't done anything to the emperor when he was still a prince, for she knew very well that Percy would become a great wizard in the history of the empire and would be hard to throw off the throne. The tea party guests inquired about His Majesty's departure, to which Fiella replied that Emperor Persilian was in the palace and needed some time before returning to power. One of the ladies sympathized with the emperor and said that not a very pleasant situation had happened in the palace shortly before his disappearance. The maidservants and other nobles had also talked about it earlier. Liffey couldn't understand what had happened to the emperor shortly before her appearance in the palace. Then we learn that recently, rumors have been circulating from the capital about a drought. It had not rained for several days, and everyone at the tea party was worried about it. From the moment Persilian ascended the throne, the empire began to receive heavy rains. But then the drought became a serious problem for the empire, and the emperor had to use strong magical effects over the empire's main well. But in the end, the drought was not eliminated. Fiella realized that Cyril's departure was due to the well drying up. After all, she had her own mission in the neighboring kingdom. She went to make arrangements to bring water to the empire. Liffey thought about the fact that the drought might end if Persilian returned to its former state. Perhaps the emperor himself was to blame for this drought. After the tea party, Liffey goes to the best bakery to buy sweets for Persilian. She spends all the money she has saved up and doesn't regret it one bit. On her way out, she meets Archduchess Dipke, who was there for a reason. Liffey tried to leave for the palace, but the Duchess wouldn't let her. The lady told the fortune teller that she had gathered some very valuable information on her. She learned that Fiella had appeared in the village from a well, and that she could not really remember the prince's mother. In the Archduchess's mind, the time frame of the fortune teller's appearance and the death of the emperor's beloved did not add up. Liffey confusedly tried to justify herself, but the mistress, trying to find out the truth, began to press her harder and harder. The girl couldn't stand it and said that she had to go to the prince. Unexpectedly, Prince Perry appeared in the bakery. He was angry at what was happening. He asked his grandmother about the purpose of her visit, but the grandmother, frightened by his anger, said that the meeting and the conversation were accidental. A tearful Liffey pressed Persilian about everything, and he told the Archduchess to get permission from him in advance for such meetings, since Liffey is his man. Perry also emphasized to his grandmother that such behavior would show others that she did not accept him. After the Duchess left, Liffey thanked the Emperor for showing up on time. She told him about what she and Madame had talked about. On the way home, the girl told the Emperor that the Archduchess now believed that the prince could not be without an assistant. Persilian became angry at Liffey's bad language and grabbed her by the hair. Fiella reassured the Emperor by saying that she had not wished to meet Dipka. She had merely gone to the bakery to buy a dessert for His Majesty. Persilian was at first touched by these words, and then showed his sternness again. Liffey and the Emperor returned to the palace. Percy was openly showing his resentment toward the fortune teller. It even seemed quite nice. On the way to the palace, the miss pestered His Majesty with questions. She wanted to know why he had come to the bakery, for he had never been to such places before. Persilian, concealing his jealousy of his assistant, explained his arrival by the fact that she had not returned at the appointed time and he had lost her. It becomes clear that the emperor has special feelings for Liffey. The next day, Persilian and Liffey received an invitation from Duke Haidar. A festive ceremony was planned in honor of Castian's birthday. Persilian didn't refuse the invitation and sent a letter agreeing to attend the banquet. This could be a great chance to strengthen his relationship with the Haidar family. The emperor took care of his assistant and prepared a dress for her that matched his suit perfectly. Liffey was delighted with her outfit because she and Persilian looked like one. At the mansion, Castian met the guests. He was very happy to meet His Highness and Miss Liffey. The celebration was held in the courtyard of the capital's mansion, and no one present understood the reason for it. When all the guests had gathered, Castian made a speech in which he drew attention to what was happening in the empire. He said that the capital's well had gone dry a few days ago, and that the Haidar family, eternally loyal to the emperor, had found a way out of it. The duke made a snap of his fingers and it rained near him. All the people present, especially the businessmen, had a bright hope in their eyes, for now they could forget about the drought. Castian turned to the prince and said that at the request of the imperial family, he could make it rain whenever he wanted. Perry thanked the duke and thought about the offer. There was hope in everyone's eyes, for among these people were entrepreneurs for whom Castian's magic was a miracle or even salvation. The duke made a snap of his fingers, and the rain in the courtyard stopped abruptly. Everyone present shouted that it was a great honor for them to meet such a phenomenon of Castian. Endetio von Haidar, Castian's father, appeared in the courtyard. It was known that he had not been out of the mansion for a long time due to illness. Persilian had only seen him once at his coronation. After a short conversation with Prince Perry, the Duke invited the guests inside. Castian decided to obey his father and invited them inside. After the rain, everyone entered the lavishly decorated hall, where separate seats were prepared for the imperial family. The little emperor had to sit next to the children. Persilian asked his assistant to pick him up in exactly 1 hour, as he would not be able to stay with the children for long. Liffey promised to fulfill his request. Liffey entertained herself separately from His Majesty. Having lost her shield in the form of Perry, she was surrounded by the attention of the nobles. Everyone tried to ask her about her predictions. False fortune teller Liffey, in order to avoid socializing with annoying people, faked fainting. She said it was very hard for her to be around people with strong energy. During these 3 months, Liffey managed to develop an excellent acting game. Suddenly, Castian approached Elenfiela. He inquired about her condition and offered to drink alcoholic beverages. However, the miss refused, for even though she was having fun, she continued to serve His Highness. Instead, the Duke asked the guest to dance. She tried to refuse, but before she knew it, she was already dancing with the young man. She calmed down, concluding that the dance would help her gain the Haidar family as allies. As she danced, Liffey noticed a strange look in the emperor's eyes as he stood on the balcony. Persilian was looking at her with a perplexed expression. Liff didn't understand why he reacted that way. The young lady became uncomfortable dancing with the Duke and went to the balcony to breathe fresh air. Castian followed her. After talking to him for a while, Liffey realized that she had forgotten about His Majesty. The emperor had asked her to attend the banquet for no more than half an hour. Miss said goodbye to the Duke, but he didn't really want to let her go. Elenfiela felt the young man stroke her arm and reacted negatively. She reprimanded him and accused him of insincerity. The Duke leaned over to his companion and confessed that he has only one goal in mind. His family wants them to always be His Majesty's allies. Thanks to Liff, their relationship could be greatly strengthened. The embarrassed Liff left the Duke's company and went after the little emperor. The soothsayer returned to the nursery, where a sleepy Perry was already waiting for her. She took the prince in her arms and they left the banquet. On the way home, Persilian was angry with his assistant for her long absence. He grabbed her by the hair and rebuked her for dancing with Castian and forgetting about him. Liffy explained to the emperor that he was wrong, as it was not her initiative. The young duke himself made her dance with him. Besides, the girl didn't know how to dance and had never done it. Persilian apologized, but continued to rebuke Liffy for his extra attention to Castian. Fiella, trying to wrest her hair from the emperor's hands, told him that she, like a faithful dog, had eyes only for him. Percy shouted that he wanted to tear her head off because he thought she was a fraud. In a fit of anger, he proceeded to tear her hair. Through her tears and hysterics, Fiella tried to calm His Majesty by saying that she was only in company with Castian for the sake of the Empire, for the Emperor had mentioned many times that he wanted to ally with Haidar. Persilian calmed down and let go of Liffy's hair. He didn't understand why she had taken the Duke's jacket from him, since it was unpleasant to her. The girl had said Castian himself had done it, and she only preferred the cape given by the Emperor. 3 days after the banquet, rumors of Castian Haidar's great power spread throughout the Empire. Everyone was shocked by the news that he could save the Empire and solve the problem of drought and lack of rain. This displeased the ruler greatly. Fiella suggested that the Emperor ask the Castian family for help, for there had been no rain for 4 months, and the people were worried about it. But Persilian could not allow gratuitous help, for he did not understand the intentions of the family. The Emperor wants Prince Perry to be the one to help the people, not a minor character in the Empire. Besides, he says that the rain caused by Castian won't save the people from drought. His power and mana is only enough for half an hour. If it was really a salvation, the Emperor would have done the same thing long ago. The Emperor asked Liffy to refrain from walking outside the palace while the issue of cooperation with Haidar was being resolved. The Archduchess arrived at the palace and strongly recommended that the prince and Liffy take a ride through the empire to reassure the people about the drought. She thought it was important for the prince to see the condition of the well in person. If the prince showed the residents his interest, it would be much easier for them. Mrs. Dipke also told Perry that he could always ask the Haidar family for help, hinting at his helplessness in the matter. Liffy watched this dialogue from the sidelines and concluded that the Archduchess was simply mocking Persilian. A few days later, Prince Perry, along with his aides Millard and Liffy, traveled to the outskirts of the capital. It was said that the imperial family had divine blood, so there was a chance that the prince's arrival would help people believe in a miracle. When they arrived, the little emperor saw dried-up wells. Liffy went over to look at one of them, but Persilian shouted at her to stop. Abruptly, an unfamiliar man appeared in front of those present. He told the prince that he had traveled too long, for his daughter had not been able to drink clean water for days. He wanted to pour a bucket of wine on Perry, but Liffy, fearing it was something dangerous, saved him from it in time. All the liquid got on her. Persilian was outraged by his assistant's behavior. He was worried about her and said that it was his fault, for he could have spoken to Duke Haidar long ago about the drought. Fiella told the emperor that the situation was entirely her fault, for she had still not been able to find the enchanted thing in such a long time and save His Majesty from the curse. In return, she tries to help him in all unpredictable situations. Sir Millard intervened in the conversation and asked His Highness what to do with this reactionary, whether to send him to prison or to execute him. It is known that people who want to harm the imperial family are punished on the spot. Prince Perry said that he would pretend that he had heard nothing from the gentleman in question, for he showed the discontent of the whole nation. He explained that he had not come to the capital to show his power and superiority, but to help solve a common problem. Instead of punishment, His Highness offered the young man a bottle of water, and even invited him to the palace to get more water for his family. This act surprised Liffy, for in extreme times the emperor had become quite kind to all provocative situations. Fiella told the emperor that she was worried about the situation, for it could have caused a lot of trouble for him. She was glad that Persilian had reacted correctly to the Lord. His Majesty attributed his calmness to the fact that Liffy herself had taught him to be kinder, for there were other kinder punishments besides beheading and bloodshed. In addition, he noted that he couldn't completely let go of the situation, since this resident had harmed his assistant. The stranger began to rebuke the prince once again. He was indignant that the imperial family had decided to get rid of the drought problem with just a few buckets. Even the central fountain of the capital had already dried up. It was learned from a citizen that during the 5 years of the emperor's reign, the drought problem had gotten worse and worse. The ruler himself, after looking at this, simply ran away from the problem. Upon hearing what was said, Liffey shouted that it would rain soon. She remembered that in the plot of the novel, Persilian had sent a letter to Cyril saying that in the 5th year of his reign, a record number of heavy rains had hit the empire. Liffey approached the emperor with a prediction of rain soon. Percy said that the anniversary of his reign was only 5 days away. He asked the fortune-teller's advice about asking the Hadar family for help. Liffey replied that one should wait a little longer. The rain would surely come. Elenfiela realized that the rain had only been mentioned in the letter to Cyril. Knowing the emperor's feelings, it could be inferred that he had written it on purpose to reassure his beloved. The soothsayer decided to take responsibility and told Persilian with full confidence that on the anniversary of his reign, it would rain heavily and fill all the fountains of the capital. The emperor felt hope in the words of his assistant and trusted her. Liffey said that if the prediction did not come true, His Majesty had the right to throw her out of the palace and justify to the people the deceit of a false fortune-teller. This confused Persilian, for he did not want to lose the person he had grown attached to. The Archduchess and her aides present insisted that the prince needed to seek help from the Hadar family, because the longer he stalled, the faster the continent would dry up. Madame Dipka jabbed her finger at Liffey and asked Perry not to trust the words of an unknown soothsayer. The prince got angry and told everyone that he had already discussed the matter with Duke Castian. If it didn't rain on the 5th anniversary of his reign, Hadar would let it rain on his own. Those present calmed down, except for the Lady Archduchess. She told Perry that in any case, there would not be enough rain for all the fountains, so it would be better to turn to Castian's magic and later to connect the tower with the wizards. The prince finished this conversation and said goodbye to the Archduchess and her company. Persilian turned to Liffey and told her that he trusted her to handle the situation. The girl was glad of this outcome, for she was the first person the emperor himself could trust. The 5th anniversary of His Majesty Persilian's reign had arrived. The prince and Liffey went out to the people, where they were discussing the expected rain and the fate of the fortune-teller in case of its absence. Perry and Liff walked over to the fountain, where she asked him to make a show out of what was happening. They touched the fountain, looking as if they were summoning water by magic. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a powerful jet of water shot out from the center of the fountain. At the same time, the sun changed to clouds and a heavy downpour came. All the people present opened their mouths in surprise and later shouted words of gratitude to His Highness. The emperor himself was in shock at what he had seen, for he had not expected it. Liffey carefully covered the emperor with her cloak. He, embracing his savior, asked her if she had really seen it in the prediction. The young lady laughed and did not answer the question. The incident was immediately reported in the newspapers. Since Prince Perry was in the place where the first rain fell, people began to trust the imperial family more. This event greatly strengthened the emperor's authority in the eyes of the common people. After this show, Sir Millard was more kind to the fortune-teller. He reported that no one understood where the water in the fountain had come from, for it had been completely dry before. Liffey suggested that it might have been Persilian's magic that had suddenly returned to him. At the palace, Liffey and Millard meet His Highness's new assistant. It was Elaine von Spade. Persilian did not hesitate to hire her as soon as he saw her name on the list of candidates. After all, according to the plot of the novel, she is the younger sister of Cyril's lover, who was the main male character. Aelin was very surprised to find that all the affairs before her had been handled by the prince, and his management style was exactly the same as the emperor himself. Liffey didn't realize if she could trust her new assistant. Liffey was upset by the emperor's decision to hire a second assistant because she wanted to be the only one. Persilian said that this girl was very clever and quick at dealing with things, and that she could be trusted because it was in her blood. Elenfiela advised Persilian to write a letter to Cyril about it, but he didn't understand what to write, since he had only done it once in response to his lover's letter. Liffey wanted to know what the lady and His Majesty had been communicating about. These correspondences were not mentioned in the novel. She concluded that perhaps Cyril was interested in the situation with Persilian and the fact that he had a lover who had borne him a child. This lie could have spoiled the entire relationship. Persilian put off writing the letter for later and broached the subject of Castian. He informed Liffey that she would be able to see the Duke tomorrow for an audience. She was delighted at the news. After a while, the young emperor fell asleep over his lover's letter. Elenfiela noticed that he had a fever. She carefully took him in her arms and carried him to the bedroom. In the chambers, Persilian suddenly transformed abruptly into a mature young man. The curse vanished of its own accord. The emperor and Liffey's hands intertwined, and His Majesty asked the girl not to leave him. She didn't understand what had happened and fell into a stupor. When Sir Millard entered the room, the curse returned to the emperor. Liffey wondered if she had imagined it, for she wanted Persilian to be big again. Mistress Dipka arrived at the prince's house, but she was met by Liffey, for it had been decided that Persilian needed rest for a few days. The Duchess spoke to the girl with arrogance and tried to show worry for Perry. Mistress brought the report from the morning meeting where that rainy day was discussed. She looked negatively into Liffey's eyes and said through gritted teeth that the fortune-teller had managed to guess the day on which it would rain. The Archduchess wanted to know what of Liffey's words was true and what was false. The girl didn't like the guest's attitude and shouted back at her that her visit was just another attempt to threaten her and threw all the reports after her. The mistress pretends to be concerned about the prince, but in fact, she came to threaten Liff. Angry Elenfiela notices the handsome Castian near her. He invites Miss to take a walk, and she can't refuse him. During the walk, the Duke told his companion how he felt about the rain. He was pleasantly surprised that His Highness had asked for his help, but he was also upset that he was not useful for this mission. Elenfiela expressed concern for Castian, which did not leave him indifferent. Deciding to seize the moment, he offered her to be his companion at the Rain Memorial Festival. However, Liffey, not wanting to waste time in the Duke's company, suggested that he invite His Highness to the event. Castian did not react to this idea in any way. The day of the festival came, when the whole city gathered to celebrate the festival. The emperor and his aides decided to go to the event, but to do it in secret from the people. They disguised themselves in escort outfits to discreetly join the guests and observe everything that was going on without too much attention to their person. At the festival, Sir Millard told the soothsayer that it was difficult for him to look at Mr. Persilian, as at that height he reminded him of his dead brother. It was because of what had happened that Sir was so solicitous of the young emperor's care. Remembering the important information, Millard interrupted the conversation and hurried over to His Highness. No one in the room was paying attention to Elenfiela standing alone. Suddenly, some stranger threw a sack over Liffey's head and dragged her around the corner. The girl tried to call Persilian for help, but no one heard her muffled voice. After a feigned fainting spell, Elenfiela came to her senses and saw before her a stranger whose face was covered by a mask. This character began to interrogate the young lady about Prince Perry. Liffey, unperturbed, told the criminals a brief biography of the emperor's child, his daily routine, and his meal hours. Later, she added a little information about herself. However, one of the strangers asked her to answer only one question: where His Highness was now. Elenfiela informed him that she had no way of contacting the prince, but could solve the problem with her predictions. While waiting for Persilian to arrive, she pretended to see the future. After a while, the villains realized that she was deceiving them and wanted to kill her. As the sword flew over Liffey, she saw some force throw the criminals back against the wall. As the sword flew over Liffey, she saw a force throw the criminals against the wall, and the fortune-teller was helped by Duke Castian and Sir Millard, who quickly dispatched the kidnappers. Persilian appeared in the evil place as well. He looked around worriedly at Liffey to make sure she wasn't hurt. Liffey took his hands and tried to calm him down, but the young emperor was quite frightened by what had happened. When everything was over, the assistant told His Majesty in detail about that conversation with the criminals. To Liffey's surprise, the emperor almost shed tears and concluded that because of him, the young lady was constantly in danger and found herself in terrible situations. Fiella hugged Persilian and said that she is not afraid at times like this. She always knows that His Majesty will find her and save her, so that no information can leak out of her mouth. The distraught emperor hugged the aide back with special warmth. After the 4-day festival, the investigation of the kidnapping revealed that the nobles were involved. However, when the soldiers showed up at their mansion, all family members were unconscious, and when they came to their senses, they shouted that they were wrong. After that, they were sent to prison. After a while, the emperor and his entourage went to the temple to perform the rite of baptism. After the magic rain, people began to say that the prince had divine powers, so soon he received a letter asking him to come for the baptism. During the preparations for the trip, Persilian was not himself. In conversation with Millard, Liffey found out that the emperor was baptized at the age of 19, and that was considered very late. His Majesty disliked the temple and everything associated with it. At the temple, Persilian went to the prayer room, where no one was allowed to enter except Millard. At this time, Fiella went to the temple library, where she spoke to one of the servants. From the conversation between the two ladies, it becomes known that the imperial family is considered to be close to God. This was because the first emperor was able to befriend the Sikar beast that originally ravaged the entire continent and received the blessing of God Simeon for it. Miss tells the prince's assistant that all priests are able to heal people and interact with fire and water. Also from the temple attendant, it becomes known that Emperor Persilian's mother was a priest, but she was expelled from the temple because she angered the church with her meeting with the emperor. After the rite of baptism, the prince and Fiella were invited to write a letter to God with their most cherished wishes. After all, thanks to such messages, Eckhart was able to end the First Continental War with a victory. Persilian took the matter quite seriously, and shutting himself away, he wished for his body to change back into an adult body. Liffey decided to write a cherished wish as well. On the paper, she indicated that she wanted all the wishes of the person closest to her to be granted. Persilian peeked at her letter and was embarrassed by what he saw. The company then set off on a tour of the temple. At some stage, the priestess told the prince that he could take only one person with him for the onward journey. Without hesitation, he decided that the fortune teller Liffey should go with him. It turned out that the emperor and his assistant had gone to the Reservoir of Truth, which could answer any question related to the true face of man. Fiella realized that now Persilian would want to test her prophetic abilities and became very worried, for she had thought that the relationship between them was as good as possible. Asked to be left alone, Liffey and the emperor wanted to check out the legend of this body of water. Percy looked into the water, and his assistant saw the reflection of an adult Persilian. He was just as beautiful as he had been that day of reincarnation. The emperor didn't believe it, but Liff said he didn't see it because of his lack of faith in God. She also confessed that she was very fond of Persilian in both guises, but stronger in the body of a child. This embarrassed him, and he told her to shut her mouth. His Majesty decided to ask the water body a worrying question, but he never got an answer. Angry at the fountain, he made his assistant do it for him. Liffey asked the water if she could become a great fortune teller and about whether she could become rich in the future. The girl didn't wait for answers to her silly questions and decided that Simeon was just busy right now. Persilian realized that the body of water was not working, and the young people began to leave. At last, Fiella asked the water in a whisper if she could help the baby. After a while, the sound of a drop falling was heard, but the emperor did not hear it. The news that Prince Perry had gone to the temple to be baptized spread very quickly. The prince was respected for not being as rude as his father and for making it rain. After a trip to the temple, the palace was plagued by rumors of ghosts in the place where the emperor killed his siblings. When he ascended the throne, the place was abandoned, but recently people have been hearing the screams of the dead and seeing the ghosts themselves. Liffey didn't believe in these made-up stories, but the emperor had decided to undermine the palace where ghosts appeared. Fiella suggested that the Lord think about the idea again, and suggested that he go to that place to look around. Persilian made a sly face and suggested that his assistant blow up that palace. Liffy thought that the emperor had just found a good excuse to get rid of the cursed place where the imperial family had been murdered. On the way to the place where the ghosts had been seen, Liffy felt uneasy and put her arm around Sir Millard. Persilian noticed this, and with a jealous glance showed his displeasure and then quickened his pace. Near the abandoned palace, Persilian was seized by memories of his dead mother, and at that moment, he felt the energy of death. Suddenly, Sir Millard saw the silhouette of a man in the distance, and the Emperor ordered an officer to catch him. The captured ghost was a fiery cloud that kept trying to get closer to Perry. At the same time, the Emperor did not feel the burns from the hot ghost. He did not care. Sir Millard touched the fire and was badly burned. Ellen Fiella offered to pour holy water on the creature, but it did not help, and the ghost moved away. While those present were wondering how to get rid of the ghost, it flew away. Persilian said that he flew towards the sacred tree Eckhart, which meant a bad omen for the emperor. After that, everyone returned to the palace. After Prince Perry visited the abandoned palace, the ghosts never appeared again. Now the people loved the little boy even more. To find out information about the fireball, Liffy went to the palace library, where she asked Eileen about the Eckhart tree. It turned out that the tree had been growing in the palace since the founding of the empire. The girl told Liffy that there is a legend that says that this tree was given by Simeon himself, because of which it is considered sacred. The tree bears a transparent fruit with a magic stone inside. The leaves of the tree are also considered sacred, for they cure many diseases. It is believed that the new emperor should give the leaves to the nobles, but this was not the case with Persilian. The nobles sided with the emperor anyway and asked for the leaves, but he kept them for himself. After the emperor's arrogant act, the nobles created a bad opinion of him by spreading all sorts of rumors. She was told about it by Cyril, who had been helping Persilian for a long time. It is further revealed from Liffy and Aylin's dialogue that Cyril and Castian were quite close. There was complete trust between them, where there was no room for jealousy, even towards the emperor. 4 days later, Persilian suddenly approached Liffy with an urgent errand to go to the magic tower. He explained that it must be done secretly to avoid attracting the attention of the Grand Duke. Their conversation was interrupted by Castian's unexpected visit. At that moment, Liffy's mind flashed with the idea of a perfect plan to get His Majesty to the magic tower. Liffy greeted Duke Castian with a smile, feigning joy at his visit. She took the opportunity to offer him a visit to a place she had long dreamed of. The Duke politely agreed to escort her to the mysterious tower. The young lady confessed to Castian that it was His Highness, not herself, who wanted to go to the tower. The Duke immediately changed his face and said that he did not want to be seen there again. He abruptly suggested changing the subject. Castian told her about the progress of the investigation into her kidnapping. He promised Liffy that the Hadar family would do everything possible to find them. At the end of the conversation, he kissed her hand. While she was talking to the Duke, Liffy saw that Persilian was watching her with a jealous eye, standing in the window of his room. She realized that she must get Castian to ask His Majesty to visit the tower. The young Duke, seeing the prince, promised his companion that he would try to fulfill Perry's dream, and the day after tomorrow they would go with him to the magic tower. However, Castian's face changed, indicating his unwillingness to go anywhere. The Duke thought over the words and decided that tomorrow he wouldn't mind taking Miss and the prince to the magic tower. Liffy was pleased and thanked Castian. A day later, Liffy and Percy were preparing for their visit to the tower. They put on stealthy clothes, and the girl noted for the better that their outfits were paired again. She suggested that the Emperor always wear paired clothes, but he disagreed. Duke Castian arrived, and the young men went to the tower. As they crossed the gate, the Sir suddenly grabbed Liffy and held her to his chest. The girl did not understand what had happened, but the Duke explained that it was somewhat dangerous to pass the gate, as it could suck her into space. Persilian looked jealously at this situation and turned away angrily. Liffy had time to see this reaction and didn't realize what it meant. It was not the first time this had happened. Especially, it was often repeated when a lady was in the company of a duke. Fiella broke the uncomfortable pause with a cheerful exclamation. She was delighted at the appearance of the beautiful tower outside the carriage window and asked Castian about it. Castian told the lady that she could also study magic in this tower, and then she would have the choice of staying loyal to it or leaving it and continuing to improve herself. This news interested Liffy, but she wasn't willing to waste her life for a long apprenticeship. The young men entered the building, where they were greeted cheerfully by the wizards. Castian went to look around the area in case of hidden surveillance of the guests. At this time, the emperor told his girlfriend about his long training in the tower, that it was a salvation for him because he had to wait a certain amount of time before becoming emperor. Suddenly, Archduchess Dipka approached Prince Perry and Liffy. She was informed by the arrival of the imperial family in the tower, even though they had come there secretly. Liffy told the mistress that the purpose of their visit was the little ruler's interest in the tower and magic in general. This confused the Duchess, for she did not understand why the guests had not come on an official visit. The grandmother turned to her grandson to ask about the furtive arrival, and he pitifully replied that he just missed his daddy and hugged his aide and pretended to cry. Earlier, the emperor had told Liffy that he would never utter those words. The Archduchess apologized to the prince and told Liffy that there was a shelf on the 7th floor, which His Majesty always used. They could go there. The lady left the uninvited guests. Castian leaned over to the weeping prince and said he could tell him a little about his father, for they had studied with His Majesty for some time. Perry said he should not do so, for he felt well and should go and see the tower. The prince and the young men went to the library, as the Archduchess had advised them. Liffy decided to give the emperor time to be alone there and hinted this to Castian. Persilian was left alone. When Fiella and Castian left the library, the Duke told his companion that there were classes in the Wizarding Tower for advanced students, one of whom had once been His Majesty Persilian. There were few such students. Only Percy had managed to become a genius in this field. Also from her conversation with the Duke, Liffy learned that the Emperor's magical abilities were instantaneous. His magic burst out abruptly and was hard to control. At the same age, the young future Emperor had unexpectedly lost his mother. The lack of maternal warmth and proper upbringing made him evil. At one point, Liffy interrupts his conversation with Castian and notices strange plaques on the wall with the names of the tower's sponsors. On one of the plaques was the name of Marquis Cetus. It was the same name the girl had seen in the Archduchess's documents listing recent sponsors. Sir Marquis was not from a family of magicians, yet he made several donations during the year. Liffy concludes that the tower's sponsorship has increased quite a bit since the prince appeared at the palace, and it all looks like a grand conspiracy and money laundering in favor of the Archduchess. Castian led Liff to the library for advanced classes, which contained forbidden books and many crystal balls, and which even students were not allowed to enter. Fiella, however, saw no barriers and was particularly curious to enter without the Duke's permission. The young man, seeing the lady's keen interest in forbidden magic in her eyes, told her that there was a curse that made people follow the orders of others. These people become like puppets. Liffy was afraid that the Duke wanted to do this to her, but he calmed her down by telling her that he was interested in her and liked her. As Liff hurried to His Majesty, she stumbled and all the magic balls fell off the shelf. Castian managed to catch the lady in his arms. At this noise came Persilian himself, who as always was worried about his assistant, but seeing the embrace of young people, he was quite angry. Liffy thought about the Emperor being angry about the lack of a clue about his curse, and decided not to touch it unnecessarily. She decided that the visit to the tower should be repeated several times, since they had left there empty-handed. As she left the library, Liff noticed one of the crystal balls change color and show a dark image. She thought she was imagining it and didn't pay any attention to it. On the way home, Fiella dozes off on Castian's shoulder. The little emperor shows that he does not like the contact between Liffy and Castian. The girl wakes up and sees Percy's displeased face in front of her. Getting out of the carriage, he slams the door loudly, which shows his jealousy. Liffy said goodbye to Castian and hurriedly apologized to His Highness. The offended Persilian asked his aide why she hadn't leaned on his shoulder in her sleep. The question embarrassed Liffey, and the emperor regretted asking it the second he did. He asked the girl not to follow him. A few days later, the fortune-teller received an invitation to dinner at the Marquis of Cetus, who was on very suspicious terms with Mrs. Dipka. Liffey did not hesitate to accept, having warned His Majesty of the forthcoming trip. The emperor sent the girl without any hesitation. He began to trust her in a special way. Upon arrival, Liffey meets the handsome son of Mr. Marquis Rossis von Chetis. He was the second son of Chetis and was an influential and respected knight. The young man confesses to his mistress his sincere feelings that arise at the sight of her. Ross escorted the guest to the dining room, where the father of the family, Marquis Cetus, and his eldest son Solon were waiting for her. The men took the opportunity to ask the young fortune-teller about the future of Solon, who was about to return from Utern. In the plot of the novel, Miss Serral also traveled to Utern, the richest country on the continent with 4 kingdoms. Liffey realized that she had once heard of this state somewhere else, but couldn't remember where. The Chetis family members began questioning the guest about her relationship to Rossis. Liff concluded that they had invited her for their own devious plans. They wanted to bring their son closer to her and thus get closer to the imperial family. In fact, Ross was already close to the emperor. He was His Majesty's knight. Over the conversation with Rossis, Ellen Fiella remembered that Utern was connected to the Archduchess's past. Mrs. Dipka had left the empire for this country after a new emperor came to the throne. The Archduchess was the eldest of a family of 6 children, all but the youngest of her siblings having been killed on the battlefield. After surviving this grief, she arrives at the palace, where she sees that her younger brother has been given the title of emperor. She does not hesitate to leave the empire and has been in Utern for almost 15 years. Since the Marquis was the same age as the Duchess, Liffey decided to ask him why Dipke left the empire when her brother became the ruler. Upon hearing this question, Sir became nervous and did not give the answer she wanted. The man told about the difficult times during the Fourth Continental War. Because the war was too bloody, the Archduchess decided to leave the empire because it was difficult for her. The Marquis decided to change the subject and offered the girl to meet his youngest daughter. Shwena has been living in the temple for 10 years and leading a decent life in order to become an Ardal. That is a soothsayer and the main guardian of the empire. There is a legend that the Ardal appeared at the call of the gods. He is chosen from the temple every decade. When the empire is in danger, Sikar looks into the future through the eye of discernment and informs Ardal. Ardal then spreads this information to everyone else. Liffey was about to leave the Holy Family as soon as possible, but Shwena's parents asked the guest to pray with their daughter. The Chetis are sure that praying with the fortune-teller will help Shwena to become an Ardal sooner. Liffey didn't want to deceive her masters with her abilities, but when she heard about the payment, she sharply agreed. She realized that it would be beneficial for the imperial family to have a family with an Ardal in debt, because it could help at any time. After a couple hours of prayer, Liffey got ready to leave. Shwena told a little about herself and her daily routine. Liffey asked her if her parents supported her difficult journey, and Shwena said yes, looking sad. Before parting, Shwena hinted to her guest not to be so inquisitive and not to try to find out information unnecessary for her. Liff didn't understand what the girl was hinting at. The next day, Ross arrived at the fortune-teller's house. She immediately decided to ask him about Shwena's oddities and ran out to the guest. When the jealous Emperor Persilian saw this, he went to the window and watched the conversation between the young people. After greeting Liffey, Rossis gave her an expensive piece of jewelry for her cloak. This act shows the serious intention of the Chetis family to get closer to the imperial family. Liff didn't want to marry this man, but for the sake of getting the right information, accepted the gift. After talking to the Lord, the young girl found out that Shwena tells everyone that she has wanted to be an Ardal since birth. Perhaps her abilities had manifested as an infant, and that seemed strange to Liffey. Rossis also told his interlocutor about what had happened during the night. Several knights from his squad had seen a fiery apparition in the dark. When Liffey heard this, she hurried to end the conversation and tell Persilian about it. The soothsayer advised the emperor to go in search of the ghost once more, but Persilian dismissed the idea, deciding that he needed to sort things out first. He concluded that Liffey had visited the Marquis on this very matter. In conversation, His Majesty noticed that his assistant was wearing a new brooch and asked her about it. Liffey told her about Rossis's gift, which displeased the emperor very much. He suggested that she buy her own gifts, but she replied that these deeds should be sincere and from the heart, such as the gift of Cyril to His Majesty. On their last meeting, Cyril gave Persilian the cufflinks he cherishes as a farewell gift. The emperor said he would only wear them when all the mess in the palace was over. The emperor started to talk about Cyril, but Liffey made a displeased expression on his face, which he noticed at once and stopped the subject. The girl said that she was very happy for him and Cyril and wished that their wishes concerning each other would soon be fulfilled, for it was good to have another person of value. Liffey also told the emperor, with a hint of her own, that he might not notice the arrival of a valuable person in his life, and he should try not to miss it. Persilian pretended not to understand how to sense such a person. Ellen Fiella analyzed her feelings for His Majesty and said that a valuable man was one whom one wanted to protect and cherish above all else. Persilian thought for a moment and pretended not to listen to Liffey. Toward evening, Sir Millard, Ellen Fiella, and Persilian went again to the abandoned palace to look for the ghost. Liffey concluded that the fiery creature was very good to His Majesty, since he was the only one whom it did not sting with its fire. But the emperor treated these words as nonsense and said that the ghost was a sacred being because the moment he touched it, the emperor felt a special sacred power. They concluded that the fireball had something to do with Simeon, and that was why it had flown to the sacred tree that time. Their thoughts were interrupted by Millard, who saw the same ghost in the distance of the garden. Persilian wanted to catch the ghost and called it to him, but the latter, mocking the little emperor, decided to play with him. After a while, the creature disappeared and had to wait for the next night to meet him. Suddenly, Knight Rossis appeared in the courtyard. He inquired of the prince what brought him to this place. Persilian looked silently at his aide and waited for her to excuse him. Liffey told him that His Highness had just decided to look around the entire palace grounds. Ross realized that their appearance was related to the ghost. Before leaving, the prince asked the knight to contact him immediately if he encountered such a problem again. The departing Persilian, Liffey, and Millard turned around sharply at the strange sound and saw a burning tree. For half an hour, the Imperial Knights tried to put out the fire with water and magic abilities, but all attempts were futile. Half an hour later, the fire disappeared by itself. The next day, rumors of the incident spread throughout the empire, and the whole nation was abuzz. The next day, rumors of what had happened spread throughout the empire, and the people were in an uproar. The emperor dreaded the arrival of the priests, as they could study the tree for a long time and would become the guardians of His Highness Prince Perry for the duration. The power would be in their hands. Persilian went to an official meeting with the nobles. On the way, he was handed a letter from the priests, who requested permission for their visit. At the meeting, the prince was told that the people were very frightened and that the matter must be dealt with quickly. The Archduchess present at the meeting began to question Perry about what had happened, for she knew that he had known in advance where the ghost would appear and had said nothing about it to those around him. Liffey tried to justify the little one, but Mrs. Dipka asked her to shut her mouth. All the nobles, the Archduchess's closest people, pounced on the girl with accusations of arrogant behavior. They believed that this commoner had no right to open her mouth in the presence of her mistress. Liffey and Persilian did not like this situation. The Marquis of Cetus intervened in the conversation, insisting that Prince Perry should invite the Archduchess to stay with him for a while until the situation with the ghost was resolved. He believes that the appearance of the fiery creature is a sign to everyone that things are not going well in the palace. Prince Perry delicately refused the idea, and this did not please Mrs. Dipka, for she wanted to invite the Archmage to solve all the problems. This could create a difficult time for the emperor. The nobles made the assumption that the fireball was Simeon's punishment, and that Liffey, appearing to be a soothsayer, might be the cause of this punishment. Liffey herself was wary of these words, as it might be true. One of those present suggested banishing Liffey from the palace to get rid of the existing problems. Persilian and Elenfiella realized that the Duchess and her entourage wanted to isolate the prince from all aides so that it would be easier to deal with him and take his place on the throne. After listening to the nobles' opinions, Prince Perry decided that the priests from Simeon's temple should be summoned, and they should deal with everything. The nobles said that this was not a solution to the problem, but Persilian rebuked them for their uncertain faith, and they calmed down. The assembly was over. The emperor asked Liffey to disregard all the words spoken by the nobles. He then addressed her with a question about the predictions related to fire. However, the assistant replied that she had not seen any predictions and that the future was still mysterious and clouded. His Majesty told the girl not to worry about this situation. She replied that she was only worried about the emperor's future now in case she was kicked out of the palace. He reassured Liff and said that no one was going to kick her out. The emperor left the hall, and the girl was left alone. Suddenly, Mrs. Dipke came up to her and started a conversation. She concluded that the fortune teller was showing false feelings towards the prince, as she had failed to help him for such a long period of time. Liffey should have immediately sought out His Majesty to solve all the problems, but she didn't. The Archduchess grabbed Elenfiella by her cloak and menacingly asked why the lady thought His Majesty was unable to help her. After the words were said, Liff concluded that the lady knew about the Persilian curse, but perhaps she was not involved in it. Dipke asked about the emperor's condition at the time of his last meeting with the fortune teller. Liffey, trying not to show confusion, said that he was in his usual state. Elenfiella said that she did not know where His Majesty was and that she had already told the kidnappers about it. The Archduchess did not understand what the girl was talking about and asked her to tell her more about it. After the fortune teller told her about the kidnapping that had taken place, the mistress smirked and gave her advice that she should only protect the prince with what she could do herself. Liffey couldn't understand these hints and was left perplexed. In the evening of the same day, the priests entered the palace. They inspected the sacred tree, which had previously been engulfed in flames, and found no part burned after what had happened. Liffey and Persilian, who had observed this, decided to leave the priests alone. Suddenly, a frightened chamberlain came running into the courtyard and informed those present that the main palace was completely covered with fire. Panic broke out among those present. A servant from the kitchen ran up to Liff and asked for her help in finding the missing cook, Sophia. Liff realized that the woman was left in the kitchen preparing snacks for the emperor and made the decision to rescue her. Seeing the courage of the fortune teller, Persilian ran after her fearfully and tried to stop her from her rash act. He embraced the girl with special feelings and showed his worries for her life. Liff realized that the emperor cared for her. As His Highness appeared, the fire began to disappear, and soon the whole palace was back to its former self. All the people present opened their mouths at the miracle. The priests turned to Prince Perry and said that they had an oracle that said that when the divine child came out of the fire, it would show everyone the way. Persilian listened to these words and realized that it was about him. The priests sat down on their knees, raised the glowing orb of divination above their heads, and bowed to the prince. Sophia stood beside them, unharmed and weeping. His Highness looked at his hands and didn't understand why the fire was gone thanks to him. Liffey approached him and asked if he was all right. Persilian looked anxiously at his assistant, trying to understand her condition. Elenfiella was happy for His Highness and congratulated him, for Prince Perry now looked like a divine child in the eyes of the people. This was the end of the incidents with the fire. The story goes on to say that in the 18th year of Eckhart's existence, the number of oracles plummeted across the continent, but it was said that a divine child was to appear who would emerge from the fire and show everyone the way. After the incident, all the local newspapers reported on what had happened. The people of the empire rejoiced because now God himself was protecting the empire. And after the fire oracle incident, Prince Perry spoke with the fire oracle. In the morning, Liffey joked to Persilian that with situations like this, Prince Perry might soon become the emperor himself. Liffey didn't realize if they had done everything right, for the influence of the pretend Prince Emperor had become too great. This could create embarrassment in the future. After the joyful event, the temple servants suggested that the prince should make an event in honor of the fact that the empire had an oracle in the person of a member of the imperial family. A festive robe was sent to the palace for Perry. Persilian, seeing the clothes, showed all his displeasure at this, for all his life he had been far from the temple. Liffey noticed the expression on his face and asked the servants about it. A female servant told the fortune-teller that relations between His Majesty and the temple had always not been good, and so the temple had never sent the emperor a vestment before. She also revealed that there was a major conflict during Persilian's coronation. In the empire, there is a tradition when the Pope comes to the palace and personally blesses the new emperor. But when Persilian ascended the throne, the Pope refused to attend the coronation because Percy had killed his entire family, causing the temple to criticize his behavior. Seeing the absence of the Pope, Persilian told those present at the coronation that he had never sent an invitation to the temple. Having said that, he left the event. This caused people to have negative feelings toward him. At the time when Percy was becoming emperor, the temple had immense power as well as the throne, but the emperor could not allow a group of priests to power the imperial family itself. After a while, Persilian decided to correct his mistakes, and in the second year of his reign, a new pope came to the palace. He paid due respect to the emperor, and from then on, the temple gradually became involved in imperial events. The woman told Liffey that the original conflict between the emperor and the temple occurred when Persilian went to be baptized at the age of 19. He wore a black robe with red inserts for the ceremony, although a white vestment had been established. This act shocked the chief priest, and he blessed the emperor with the words, "For your sins." After Assistant Liffey's story, it was clear why Persilian's facial expression was so displeased, for he had been horribly criticized before and was now being praised as a divine child. A few hours before the event, Liffey decided to salvage the situation and smooth over the prince's displeasure by offering to put a red cape over his attire. But Perry pretended to be completely satisfied with the clothes sent to him. Liffey, with great care, suggested that the emperor pretend to be ill to justify his unsteady appearance to the Pope. Persilian hesitated, and Liffey advised him to do what his heart told him to do. He agreed with her idea. After hours of festive procession, a tired Persilian returned to his room, where Liffey was waiting for him. The girl was glad that her robe had come in handy for His Majesty, for that was how he attracted everyone's gaze. Liffey confessed that she, too, had eyes only for him. Persilian was embarrassed and asked the assistant why she had left the event towards the end. She laughed and said that she had gone to the store to buy a toy for him. The emperor became angry, for he feels that Liffey sees him as nothing more than a cute child. Ellen Fiella tried to reassure His Majesty that in this guise he looked like the sweetest and most heartfelt child. Persilian remained silent, and the girl decided to continue showering the child with compliments, to which he could not stand it, and chased her out of the room. When Liffey entered the courtyard, she saw the Marquis's eldest son, Mr. Solon, who asked for her help in finding the building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The girl decided to give her guest a tour, during which she wanted to ask him about the Kingdom of Eternia, where he had lived for 20 years. Solon told her that when he was a boy, his father had advised him to become friends with the Archduchess. Liffey remembered the Marquise's reaction to the question about Mrs. Dipka and did not understand why he was nervous, because, according to his son, he had a very positive attitude towards her. The Duke also revealed that the Archduchess had stopped all contact with his family as of late, but she had recently sent Schwena a small dagger used for self-defense in honor of her birthday. It was rather strange for Liffey to hear that. Upon arriving, Solon offered to pay Liffey for her help, but she offered another option for gratitude. She wanted to ask the Lord about his strange sister. Solon said that his sister was a believer who sincerely wished to become an Ardal. Ellen Fiella didn't believe Solon's words and, remembering Schwena's words, decided not to take much interest in their family. The young men said goodbye. Due to the fact that the Ikhart Empire has a history of thousands of years, there are many official events. This time it was planned to hold the State Foundation Day and Holy Day. Ellen Fiala knew nothing about these holidays, and in order to properly prepare for them, she decided to ask Elaine for a quick tutorial on the history of the Holy Day. The assistant told the myth that the Holy Day marks the first mentioned meeting between the emperor and Sikar. 10 days after this meeting, the founding of the state took place when the emperor received Simeon's blessing. Therefore, the Holy Day is celebrated 10 days later. In preparation for the festivities, the temple sent the prince a new vestment, an order, and a precious bracelet. It is known that the temple had never made such preparations in the history of the empire. Aylin told me that when there was a continental war, the empire was at a disadvantage. When the enemies tried to break into the shrine with the empire's warriors, a firepower came down on them and blocked their way, and due to the heat of that fire, 3 crystals were formed. From these, the shrine made an order, a bracelet and a ring, which was later lost. Liffey had thought that Prince Perry would have to visit the very Seekin sanctuary where the guardian dragon Sikar had once stayed and where the emperor had met him, as well as the place where Simeon himself had visited. But Aylin dispelled her speculation. On the day of the feast, the prince would have to go to the temple for 10 hours of prayer, and there were no other special traditions. Liffey didn't understand how Persilian would be able to endure such a long time, for it would be torture for him. The morning of the sacred day came. Ellen Fiala saw the emperor and complimented him on his attire. Persilian was angry and decided to go to the temple in a separate carriage, away from Liff. As Persilian and Liffey rode toward the temple, the girl saw a beautiful picture, a bright blue river dividing the forest and the desert into 2 equal lands. Arriving at the temple, Liffey and Persilian met the Pope, who was delighted to see the little prince. Perry bowed and thanked him for sending the expensive gifts. The Pope responded by saying that it was a sign of the respect he was obliged to show to the saint who cared for Simeon. On the way to the holy place, Papa told the prince and Liffey about the ancient temple and about the guardian dragon still sleeping deep in the forest. Persilian, who was already visiting the place for the 5th time, pretended to be very interested in listening to Papa's stories, as if he were seeing it all for the first time. While talking, Ellen Fiala notices a red-haired child running around in the forest. She told the priests about it, but they denied it, explaining that it was very difficult for ordinary people to enter the holy forest. As they made their way to the shrine, Liffey and Persilian saw a table with a meal prepared from vegetables and fruits gathered from the shrine grounds. During the meal, Liffey tried to talk to a disgruntled Perry, but he defiantly answered all her questions. The girl didn't understand what she had done wrong. After prayer and a meal, Percy went to have a long talk with Papa. At this time, Liffey decided to visit the place where the Ardles lived. At the shrine, she had a strange premonition, as if she were worried about something. Suddenly, Liffey heard a strange sound, and turning around, she saw the red-haired child again. Remembering her dad's words, she concluded that a ghost was standing in front of her. He was not happy to see her and asked her the purpose of her visit. The little boy, identifying himself as the master of these lands, grabbed Ellen Fiala and ordered her to kneel before him. Liff complied with his request and bowed. The girl asked him if he was Sikar, and to her surprise, he confirmed what she said. He explained that the image of a toddler was most suitable for Liffey, as she loves small children. He added that lately, she was most worried about the person who looked the same. The guardian dragon admitted that he used to be tall and grown up, and now he didn't understand why he had shrunk. Liffey concluded that it was a shared curse with Persilian. She tried to get some clue from the little guy, but suddenly Persilian's screams were heard from the distance. Persilian and the priest came to the place where Ellen Fiala was. It was explained to her that when the prince had lost his assistant, he had snapped out of his seat and gone to look for her. His Highness was very worried about Liffey. Those present saw a small child near Liffey and asked her about it. Lying, the girl said that when she was walking in the woods, she came across this little child who had hurt his leg and now needed care. The priests were confused, for no one can enter the forest without the permission of the temple. the kid shouted sharply that this was his land and that he was its guardian, whom they honored. Liffey tried to cover his mouth, but he kept shouting. The Pope came to the place and asked the priests to throw the child out. The child insulted everyone present, and after that the Pope was furious. He asked the prince to pray because the sacred place had been desecrated. The kid calmed down by looking at Percy. He noticed the bracelet and chain on him, and told everyone that the ring lost from the set was under the pillar behind the temple. After saying this, the baby cried because he was not believed. Everyone present stood in a stupor. The Pope had the priests check the table in question. The ring, lost 200 years ago, was indeed there. The little boy was proud of his truth. The priests, mouths open, asked the guardian why he had turned into a child and whether he could see the future through the eye of clairvoyance and control fire, but he answered these questions in the negative. One of the priests said that the Ardles foreshadowed Sikaar in a slightly different guise. There were zero coincidences with this little guy. Those present suggested that the guardian of the earth measure his divine power by simply touching the magic ball. When he did so, the ball formed fire energy inside it and soon burst. Until now, it had only been possible to break the crystal once, when the strongest of all generations, the Pope called Haman, decided to also test his divine abilities. In both cases, it was a powerful display of strength. The priests asked the guests to wait for a while they removed the dangerous shards. In the meantime, Persilian decided to take advantage of the situation and asked the guardian of the lands if he could help him with some problem. The kid sensed that the prince had a rather strange energy. He pretended, exactly as Liff had once done, to look into a future that was beyond his predictions. Percy grinned and asked his assistant why she had brought her copy here, since he was plagiarizing it. She remained silent to the joke. Hearing the talk of a possible fate, the kid leaned on Ellen Fiella's arm and asked her to stay with her, saying that being only by her side, he could solve the prince's problem. Liffey neatly refused, as the priests have to take care of the unexpected guest themselves. The little boy got angry and told Perry that if they didn't take him in, everyone around them would find out the truth, that instead of the prince, the emperor was actually sitting there. Persilian and Liffey were speechless at the words they heard. Persilian, not doubting his decision, went out to the priests and said he wanted to take the baby back to the palace. Liffey and the emperor had to lie, saying that they had known the child since the days when the prince lived furtively, still outside the palace. The priests didn't believe their words, but Liffey said that today they just didn't recognize each other, because it had been a long time since their last meeting. But now that the little ones had gotten to know each other, they decided that they didn't want to be apart anymore. So the decision was made to continue his life inside the palace of the empire. Liffey told Papa and the priests that the baby's name was Haman, and that he only introduced himself as Sikaar because he was playing a child's game. Those present decided not to go against the prince's wishes. The Pope concluded that the situation had been Simeon's wish, for everything happened in a holy place on the holy day. The emperor and his entourage returned to the palace. It was decided that little Haman would be given a separate palace in which to live, but he became cranky and said he wanted to sleep with Liffey. Persilian was enraged with jealousy of his friend. The little boy grabbed the girl by the hair and called her to wash together. The angry emperor ordered her to be released. Sir Millard tried to pull the child away from the fortune teller, but the child grabbed her hair even tighter. Then Persilian ordered the knight to nail this disobedient child by letting his head fall from his shoulders. Sir swung around and wanted to strike the child on the head. Frightened, the baby asked Liffey for help. She asked His Majesty to let her and the baby sleep together. She would watch over him. Percy agreed. Before going to bed, Ellen Fiella warned Mr. Sicard that he should be careful what he said, for information about His Majesty's curse was kept strictly secret. She also asked the little one to behave in public as a friend of Prince Perry. Sicard agreed to be more polite. He also told Liff that he was the one who had buried the lost ring long ago, and only a powerful priest could find it. But such a one had not been born in a long time. The next day, the emperor received a letter from the priests, asking the prince to send the baby back to the temple. Persilian was against the idea, as he was not sure that Sikar would not tell people anything about his curse. Suddenly, this little boy came running into the room and asked Liffy to give him a hug. The jealous emperor asked him how long he was going to be here, to which Sikar replied that his presence might help Persilian. After dinner, the keeper of the lands called Liffy to go for a walk. He wanted to find something. Persilian and Sir Millard went with them. Outside, the little gentleman was trying to find something, but when he saw the Imperial Lake, he pointed to the opposite shore and told everyone to head out. Liffy realized that neither she nor Sir Millard had conducted a search for the conspiratorial item in the lake territory. The Emperor had decided that they should go at Sikar's behest. After reaching the middle of the lake, the baby got cranky and asked to go back. He explained that he wanted to get to the place where he could see the most beautiful sunset. Persilian became angry at the useless child, and they began to quarrel. In a fit of anger, the baby shouted that he could prove his strength by making the lake part and jumped into the water. Liffy wanted to catch him but didn't have time. The baby found himself in the water and began to drown. He was quickly pulled to shore where he cried from his helplessness. Something had gone wrong with his life too. Those present turned around abruptly at the sound and saw the fiery ghost. His Majesty told Liffy to stand behind him and not to worry. Persilian wanted to call the ghost to him, but the awake little boy saw the ghost and stretched out his arm as if it had entered him. After his story, it turned out that the fireball was part of his energy, which he could not control. The evil emperor asked Sikar where his energy came from in the palace, since for a month now, everyone has been standing on their ears due to the regular appearance of the burning creature. The kid replied that his energy only appeared in the places where he lived, even in Sakini a few times. No one understood the connection between Sakina and the palace, but Sikar explained that there was a legend about a tree given by Simeon. It was said to be connected to Sakina. At the end of the story, the little boy promised the emperor that such situations would not happen again. He hugged Liffy and asked if his energy had harmed anyone. The girl told the child in detail about all the incidents that had happened. She also said that the prince put out the fire with his appearance. These words surprised the kid. Sikar said that this could not have happened, as His Highness could not put out the fire without being an Ardal. He abruptly changed the subject and asked those present to return to the palace as soon as possible. The next day, the kid was summoned to the main temple of the empire to confirm his divine power. He was presented with the most powerful orb, whose readings were the most accurate. The guardian of the lands touched the orb, and flames of fire erupted from it. The orb split into small pieces. The priests were surprised at this, for no one had broken the orbs since Papa Haman. They began to wonder if the baby could be the result of the reincarnation of that pope. The story of the guardian of the lands is indeed similar to that of Papa Haman. For after losing his wife to the plague, Haman went into wandering, as a result of which he joined the temple. For the sake of becoming a priest, he measured his divine energy in the capital's temple. When he found out about his power, he cried right in front of the ball, for he also possessed the ability of healing. If he had found out about his power earlier, he would have been able to save his family. After that, he made the decision to travel the continent and use the power to heal people. Papa asked Persilian to keep the little boy in the temple, as his strength would be highly honored by all the priests, and he personally wanted to train him, to make him a future pope. Upon hearing this, the little one replied that he did not want to live in the temple while he was small. Liffy tried to talk them out of it, saying that the child was afraid of strangers. After all, he had recently lost his parents, and it was better for him to be in the palace with his friend Perry for a while. The little boy, when he heard that they wanted to make a future pope out of him, was very excited. He thought that everyone in the temple was so incompetent that it would be better if he were in charge. The emperor admonished him for these thoughts, but the little boy told Persilian to address him with special respect. Liff explained to the little one that he would have to study all the time and pray a lot in order to become a great holy daddy, since he couldn't control his powers yet. Liff also came up with the idea of doing an experiment to confirm that the guardian dragon in front of them was indeed a guardian dragon. A frightened Sikar asked to be taken home and ran ahead. After analyzing the kid's behavior, Liffey concluded that he was afraid to appear in the temple, but she did not understand why he was so afraid. When the little one ran home, Liffey was left alone with Persilian. She begged His Majesty's praise for minimizing all opportunities to visit the temple. Percy agreed with her. The assistant also asked the emperor to stay by his side. Liffey explained that Persilian had recently grown noticeably cold toward her, thereby deeply wounding her heart. The emperor said she was no use to him, hanging around him for nothing. But Liffey thought Percy was used to her chatter, and the words upset her. Elenfiela told the emperor that she had noticed his excitement when he lost her in the sacred forest. Hiding his true feelings, Persilian yelled at the fortune-teller for her irresponsibility and her ability to cause a stir in the simplest of situations. Liffey tried to justify herself to Mr. Sicard, but Percy would not listen to her and walked away resentfully. Suddenly turning around, he admonished Liffey for taking her time to walk beside him. Satisfied, the girl followed the emperor. The next day, rumors spread throughout the empire about a baby who had divine power that could destroy not only the magic ball, but also the entire capital. The next day, rumors spread throughout the empire about a baby with divine powers that could destroy not only the magic ball, but the entire capital. The priests cannot accept the situation and constantly send letters to the palace, asking that His Highness allow Haman to join the temple on the day of the founding of the empire, on the feast of which they want to introduce him as the future pope. After a little thought, Prince Perry agreed, but mentioned that the baby would not grow up with the priests, but near him. The temple gratefully accepted this decision. Preparations for the feast began. The servants and Liffey decided that the prince and Haman should dress as the first emperor and guardian of the Sikar lands, according to the legend. Hearing this, Haman said that the emperor was goal that first meeting. The little ones opened an argument on the subject, which resulted in Perry winning. A couple of days before the day of the founding of the state, aristocrats would come to His Highness and talk about their family's services to the empire, hoping to receive a blessing. According to tradition, the emperor would present the most distinguished family with a leaf of the sacred tree. With Persilian's accession to the throne, this tradition disappeared. When asked by the aristocrats why they were not blessed, the emperor replied that they were not worthy of praise because they had been disrespectful and insolent to his father. The noblemen present at the meeting suggested that His Highness present the sacred leaf to Shwena, the daughter of the Marquis of Cetus, because for 10 years the girl has devoted herself to preparing to become an Ardala. The prince is not sure that Shwena's theology will be of any use to the empire. Those present asked the Archduchess's opinion on the matter, but Mrs. Dipka refused to comment, citing that the main decision rested with the prince. Liffey and Persilian did not understand why the Archduchess suddenly stopped supporting the aristocrats. The emperor turned to Liff and asked her about the Marquis's daughter. The girl told him that she had only been able to see her at common evening prayer. Percy was surprised at the news that his assistant prayed periodically. Percy thought about it and concluded that Shwena Ardal might bring trouble to the imperial family in the future, but he still decided to hand the sheet of the sacred to her and thus strengthen his position in the eyes of the nobles. The day before the empire was founded, Duke Castian arrived at the palace. This visit came as a surprise to Liffey, for Castian periodically goes to the south of the empire to take care of his ailing father. Recently, the count's ailment had worsened, so Castian had returned to the capital late. Liffey told the guest that this time the celebration would be quiet, without excessive parties. Castian understood this, for during the emperor's reign there had never been any lavish festivities, because His Majesty did not like the extra attention to himself. Liffey told the Duke that Prince Perry's friend had shown up at the palace, which was a message from Simeon himself on the holy day. Castian said that rumors had already reached him that little Haman would be the next pope, and rejoiced for him. Liffey continued talking about the baby, but the Duke interrupted her and remembered the tradition of the sacred leaves. He hinted to her that he would like to receive this cherished gift from His Highness. Liffey said she didn't want to get into the matter. It was the day of the founding of the state. Persilian did his best to emphasize the significance of this holiday. The ceremony was held in the main temple on the palace grounds, the gates of which were open to all comers. The prince himself was benevolent and followed the established traditions. When everyone had gathered in the temple, the official part of the ceremony began, during which His Highness Peri presented leaves of the sacred tree to the most important families. Schwena von Settis and Castian von Haidar were awarded. However, the lady was not happy with the gift. The 6-hour ceremony came to an end. The joyful prince went to the balcony and waved to all the nobles. Afterwards, he complained to Lif that he was tired of seeing the faces of the nobles, and now he wanted to rest. Castian Haidar arrived to thank His Highness for his blessing. The Duke invited Peri to a party, decorated as much as possible for the Magic Tower Festival, to remind the prince of his father. Hearing this, Haman started laughing hard, and it made Persilian angry. He told him to shut his mouth. Castian didn't realize what he had said that was so funny. Laughing, the little boy said that he too wanted to take a look at the Magic Tower Festival that Peri's father had once attended. He had behaved perfectly at the festival, and now he wanted to be thanked for it. The prince agreed to take the little one with him. At the party were Liffey, Persilian, and Haman. Sir Millard was given the day off, for he had done well with the 6-hour ceremony. Haman misbehaved at the feast. He started buying up all the food he saw and told the prince to pay for it. However, the Duke of Castian decided to take care of all the expenses. Later, Haman suggested that Peri play a game of tumblers. Within 10 minutes, Haman had never once guessed where the balloon was. The old woman, having concluded that Liffey and Castian were married, decided to give this beautiful family the grand prize. Ellen Fiella stepped back and grabbed Castian's cloak, and he laughed. He stroked her cheek gently and said that she could not predict the future after all. When little Haman saw this scene, he advised Liffey to stay away from this strange man, for he looked like the kind of man who would rob her blind and destroy an entire empire. As a rule, handsome guys are the most dangerous. Liffey explained to the little one that Castian was quite benevolent, for he had paid for the whole party, and thanks to him, Haman had taken the grand prize of the lottery. The baby abruptly changed his opinion and called the man the most honorable. Persilian got tired of listening to this kid's ramblings, and they went home. The next day, Haman told Liffey that he wanted to visit the main temple. He needed to find the stash of relics there. Liff hoped he had decided to deal with the emperor's curse. The boy told the emperor about his idea, but he didn't care and let him go to the temple. Persilian was uneasy with the commotion and hoped that Haman would not come back. Ellen Fiella and Haman went to the main temple of the empire. They put on the robes worn by commoners to conceal their appearance. They realized that the priests would make a celebration of it and summon everyone. Liffey asked Haman if the missing relic they were looking for could save him from the curse hidden somewhere in the palace. However, he said that he was not concerned about the problem, because even in the form of a child, he was still the guardian of the lands. In the temple building, the little boy made quite a commotion. He heard some voices from the Ardal statues and knocked them over. Liffey grabbed Haman and they tried to hide. Some person came to the noise. It was Schwena. The lady spotted the intruders and hid them from the knights who came running. She lied to them that the statues had fallen by themselves while she was praying. The knights apologized and left the temple. Schwena talked to the guests and found out that young Haman showed interest in worship, and that in the future he wanted to direct his divine powers to the defense of the empire. These words pleased the lady, and she gave the little one some candy. Before leaving, Liff took the opportunity to congratulate Schwena on His Highness's blessing. Remembering the previous meeting, the priestess concluded that Liff was against the prince's decision because there was a misunderstanding between them. Liffey disagreed with Schwena and tried to convince her otherwise. The ladies said goodbye and the guests went home. On the road, Haman noted Schwena for the better. She seemed quite nice to him. Liffey explained to him that the lady was preparing to become an Ardal. He was surprised because he didn't think that all Ardals had to pass an exam to become an Ardal. Ellen Fiella said that the selection of the Ardals would take place next year, and they would all come to the meeting with Haman. The kid made the appearance of an abandoned puppy and said that he would not come to this meeting as he had become useless, but Liffey quickly convinced him otherwise. Haman calmed down and handed her friend a ring and a gemstone with a drop of blood inside it. When Liffy saw it, she realized that she had seen the same stone on the sacred statue. She concluded that the little boy had robbed Simeon himself by such an act. The fortune teller was nervous, but Haman reassured her that his energy was inside the stone. He promised to bring the jewels back to the temple soon. Gradually, autumn came. Haman continued to live with his majesty in the palace. After one of his walks, the servants began to whisper that he was exploring the courtyard of the capital with a special zeal, as if he were in search of something valuable. Over the conversation with Sophia, Liffy realized that Persilian had no important tasks left for the rest of the year. The servant said that there were things to do before, but not anymore. She sadly explained that His Majesty's birthday was expected. Castian had mentioned it once before, but Liffy hadn't paid attention. In the past, the palace had hosted a party to celebrate another year, but now that the emperor was away, His Highness would be celebrating alone. That same day, Liffy and Haman went out again to search for the cursed thing. Not far from the palace, the little boy felt a familiar energy. Digging through the bushes, he found a string like a bracelet. Haman said that at first he thought the energy of this bracelet was the same as Persilian's, but realized up close that he was mistaken. This meant that the kid was interested in ridding the emperor of the curse. He told Liffy that they should search the entire area of the palace again soon. They set off for home. On the way, the girl realized that they were going to the wrong place. She saw the house in front of her, which was after the fire. Before she could ask Haman a question about it, Liffy heard his call and left. On the road, Liffy and the baby almost got lost as the girl forgot the way back. Thanks to some woodcutter, they managed to get home. When the soothsayer and the baby returned to the palace, they saw that a cardinal was at Persilian's reception. He tried to ask the child to live and study on the temple grounds, but Prince Perry was adamantly opposed. His Highness sent the priest away, but the latter offered himself as Haman's guardian. He doubted Mrs. Liffy's abilities and was not sure of the child's safety. He believed the child should live in stability. Further mention is made of Persilian's mother. She was suspended for having an immoral affair with the emperor, and she and her illegitimate son were forced to live in a remote palace. They were treated negatively by everyone. Even though the main temple now had a new pope, the same opponents of Persilian's mother remained in high places. And now, a man from the main temple came to the emperor to talk about the child's stability. It sounded foolish. The conversation was interrupted by Liff and Haman appearing. The lady, having heard the entire conversation, explained to the cardinal that she was trying her best to bring comfort to the baby. After her words, the priest apologized, bowed, and left. Haman held out the bracelet he had found to the emperor and asked him about its birthplace, for it was assumed that the bracelet had absorbed the energy of Persilian's birth. When Percy saw the bracelet, he realized that it was the bracelet his mother had once given him. But long ago it had been lost in the forest, and, as a child, the emperor had not found it. Haman explained that it wasn't Percy's energy he felt, but his mom's, and now it continues to emanate from the bracelet. Persilian thanked the little helper for the item he had found and began to ask him about the place where he had found it. Liffy said that on the way out of the forest, they had seen a black building burned by fire. Persilian thought for a moment, and later said with a sigh that that building was the Western Palace, the one he and his mother had once lived in. A week before His Majesty's birthday ball, the palace was in a frenzy. The people were worried about Persilian's absence. Almost every palace employee asked Liffy about it, to which she replied that she didn't know how to contact the emperor. It is known that Persilian's birthday is not his personal holiday, but a significant date for the entire empire. This day is popularly called by another name, the birthday of the Master of the Empire. On his birthday, the emperor is charged with the duty of opening the ball. Even though the birthday boy's seat is now empty, the tradition must be respected. There have been similar situations in history when, in the event of the emperor's illness, the duty of opening the ball was shifted to the crown prince. When the palace people asked Liffy a question about His Majesty, she answered by asking them about the history of the Western Palace. When they heard the name, they all scattered and pretended to be very busy with things. Ellen Fiala decided to ask Sophia's cook about the palace, for the girls were very close and could confide secrets to each other. But Sophia looked away fearfully and did not give the answer she wanted. Liffey knew only part of the building's past. Priscillian had once lived there with his mother, who had been deliberately sent to a remote location by the emperor. Liffey didn't understand why her childhood home was in such poor condition. The soothsayer tried to find out the cause of Percy's mother's death in the imperial archives, but all attempts to find information were in vain because the temple had placed a ban on the story. After finding the bracelet, Priscillian had become surprisingly calm. Liffey was afraid to talk to him or do anything stupid. After thinking it over a few times, the girl told the emperor about the talk about his birthday and asked if he wanted to continue the tradition of the celebration. He replied that he was obliged to hold it at a high level. Priscillian explained to his assistant that if the prince did not open the ball, the problem of the emperor's absence would be felt even more strongly than before. In fact, the last celebration had exhausted Percy very much, and in the middle of the festivities, he had told the people that he wanted to disappear and left. But this time, it should be different. Liffey told His Majesty that she would try her best to make sure Prince Perry left the celebration as early as possible. She planned to tell the people that the child missed his father very much and take him to bed. Priscillian disagreed with that idea. Priscillian examined his hands and said, with particular sadness, that he had hoped to return to his true form, at least for the day of his birth. Liffey was frightened by these words, for she had not been able to help him in such a long time. Priscillian calmed the seer and told her that he didn't mean to threaten her. He explained that even the guardian dragon had been affected by the curse, and the situation was beyond Liffey's powers. The girl offered to take the initiative to divert the people's attention away from the emperor's person, thus buying more time. The people believe she is connected to the missing His Majesty and want to spend more time with her, trying to find out hidden information. Priscillian hovered abruptly, and Liffey tried to draw attention to herself. After a moment, he made a reproach to her that she had begun to act strangely lately. Liffey explained to the little man that he was the one who often withdrew into himself. The emperor was surprised at the words he heard, for he had never noticed such a thing about himself. Liff assumed that his pensive state was due to the bracelet he had found. Priscillian did not understand why the girl remembered the bracelet. She explained that immediately after the discovery, Percy had become anxious and withdrawn. He agreed with her and said it was about that day. The girl couldn't understand how the bracelet given by her mother was connected to some unknown day. Not finding the answer in her head, Ellen Fiala went to the courtyard in search of information. Liffey came to the training ground of the guards unit where the knights, among them Sir Millard, were practicing. Miss asked the gentleman for a moment of his attention and asked him a question about His Majesty's special day. Sir Millard thought the girl was referring to Priscillian's birthday. Liffey told him about the bracelet Sikar had found and the Emperor's further condition. The master realized that Liffey and Haman were on the grounds of the abandoned palace and asked her about His Majesty's reaction about it. She replied that His Majesty had not said anything about the fire when she began to question him about it. Ellen Fiala asked Sir to tell about the fire that had occurred, but the agitated Millard did not want to speak carelessly about the situation. Liffey realized that something terrible had happened, because of the memory of which Priscillian had withdrawn. Liff thanked Millard and let him go to his training. She realized that the reason the Western Palace was on fire and in disrepair was probably related to Mother Priscillian. Otherwise, people wouldn't be afraid to discuss the subject openly. The girl already knows that there is another similar burnt palace in the capital, where the imperial family lived. In it, about 5 years ago, Priscillian had murdered his siblings. Liffey concluded that the incident with her mother's house was no accident. The Western Palace, the bracelet they had found, the coming birthday were depressing little Priscillian. Looking at him, Liffey vaguely drew a connection between his past and present, but she wasn't sure, for no one could tell the truth. 6 days before the significant date, Prince Perry announced that he would organize a celebration for the Emperor's birthday. From that moment, the palace began active preparations for the celebration. During the preparations for the celebration, there was talk among the servants that everyone was getting the same feeling as last year. The palace attendants realize that Prince Perry is now in charge of the celebration, but they feel as if the emperor himself is in the palace. Although it had been more than 3 months since His Majesty had disappeared, it seemed to the people that the ruler had been by their side the whole time. Liffey laughed and thought that it was all empty words, because the prince and the emperor would never meet. Liffey wanted to visit Persilian, but Sir Millard met her at his door. He told her that His Majesty was taking the day off and had cancelled all meetings and audiences. Sir asked Liffey to refuse all aristocrats if they wanted to meet the prince. Ellen Fiella asked the knight if she could at least enter Persilian's bedroom, but was refused. The emperor had cancelled her appointments for that day as well. The girl was quite embarrassed by this, but Millard was calm about the situation. Liffey worried about the emperor's condition. She thought of the sudden time off as a sign of Persilian's burnout. The girl did not know what to do this day and decided to go to the prince's assistant Elaine because they had not seen each other for a long time. Eli was glad to see an acquaintance. Hiding a feeling of jealousy, Ellen Fiella asked her assistant if Persilian had allowed her to enter his room on his day off. The girl said that the prince had forbidden her to enter, but she was sure that Perry would let Liffey pass, for she is his guardian. The prohibition, connected with Liffey too, surprised the assistant. The girls concluded that the prince has a growing sense of independence lately. Elaine noted that little Perry does the same thing as his father. The girl told Liffey that she had once read the palace records, which spoke of a similar situation. Emperor Persilian would take a day off every year, 24 hours before a significant date, and would not let anyone near him. It came to Liffey's attention that Sir Millard was calm because he was already used to the emperor's actions like this. But the seer didn't understand why the emperor was doing this. In preparation for the birthday party, Elaine went through all of last year's notes about it. It was unclear to her why the prince's guardian was unaware of his plans, so she asked her about it. Liffey explained for the assistant that Prince Perry could understand that the day off was part of the preparations for the gala. She was only a guardian, so she couldn't know everything that was going on in the child's mind and soul. But as she thought about the words she had heard and remembered Persilian's words, she realized that the very day that everyone was keeping silent about had arrived. The girls' conversation was interrupted by the butler, who announced the arrival of guests. Liffey should have refused the guest, but when she saw Archduchess Dipka at the door, she fell into a stupor. The girl gave the mistress the notes of the meeting for which she had come. At that moment, the fortune-teller realized that the Archduchess would pelt her with questions and was quite afraid of it. The lady asked Liffey if she knew anything about the emperor's return on his birthday. The girl said she had no communication with His Majesty. The Archduchess knew about the emperor's weekend on such a day. She decided to find out the truth once again from the prince's aide, asking her why Prince Perry had cancelled all meetings and gatherings with the aristocrats today. Liffey realized that the Duchess was guessing something. She explained to her mistress that little Perry was tired because of the preparations for the feast, so she didn't want to see anyone today. The Archduchess noted that His Majesty Persilian had done the same thing for the last 4 years, taking the day off exactly 24 hours before his birthday. Ellen Fiella tried to keep the conversation to a minimum. Mrs. Dipke believed this version because she had previously been told that little Perry misses his father very much. Because of his longing, the prince tries to copy His Majesty's behavior in everything. Pensive, the Archduchess continued to ask Liffey strange questions. She asked how Perry planned to celebrate the big day, whether he would take part in greeting the guests or would watch modestly from the sidelines. All these inquiries were stumping Liffey. Remembering the previous incident, the girl thought that the Archduchess was specifically inquiring about the prince's future whereabouts, as she was planning to organize another assassination attempt. It was recalled that during the last ceremony, there was an incident that could have killed Persilian. One of the escort knights was under attention control magic, and due to that, set off a powerful explosion using an artifact. The perpetrator in this situation could be the Archduchess, but for now it's only Liff and Persilian's speculation. To evade the question about the gala and His Majesty, the soothsayer pretended that a prediction had come to her mind. Liffey told the audience that on the day of the gala, His Highness's Energizer would enter the hall from the east side. The girl remembered that Persilian was writing a solemn letter on behalf of the emperor, which would be brought into the hall precisely from the east. Dipka and the servants opened their mouths at the words. The lady asked whether it was a fiction or a prediction. Ellen Fiella confirmed that it was a prediction. She told the Archduchess that she did not feel well after the powerful energy and hurried away. Following the fortune teller, the Archduchess made a displeased face and said that she would wait for the coming celebration to test her prediction. When Liffey returned to Aylin's office, she was already puzzled. She asked the fortune teller if His Majesty was really coming to the celebration. Ellen Fiella explained that she wasn't sure it would be the emperor, but maybe a person like him or a personal item with his energy. Liffey closed the subject and began to read the records of the state of affairs of the empire. Some of the eastern territories were experiencing another drought. Even the level in the wells had become extremely low. Liff was disturbed by this. Elaine's assistant reassured the lady and said that there would be no problem. She promised that it would rain heavily today, for she had read in the palace records that for 15 years it had rained all over the empire on the day before His Majesty's birthday. Liffey did not believe this fact and decided to see for herself. She went down to the window and saw that the clouds had gathered in the sky and it was about to rain. It happened at the same time every year. During the night of the same day, it rained. Haman felt extremely unwell because of the rain. As Liffey was taking care of him, she saw a strange scene through the window. Sir Millard and Persilian, armed with umbrellas, went somewhere in the rain. After putting Sikar to bed, Liffey looked out the window again, but His Majesty Persilian was not in the young knight's company. Sir was standing in the rain waiting for the emperor. Liffey looked at Millard in bewilderment, and he saw the look in her eyes. Remembering the knight's words, Liffey suggested that it was not a good idea to talk openly about today. It was a topic to be approached with caution, for Persilian was very withdrawn after what had happened. Liffey still wanted to know about everything. Suddenly, there was a knock on Liffey's room. It was Sir Millard. He tried to hint to the fortune teller that her presence near His Majesty always lifted his spirits. Liffey didn't understand what the knight was talking about. With his head down, Sir still dared to tell the girl about the terrible story connected with today. It turned out that on that day, Persilian's mother had died in a fire. Millard revealed that the fire occurred in the West Palace, where Percy lived with his mother. Because of the shock of losing his mother, His Majesty had manna the next day and went to the magic tower for training. Liffey remembered that when they had visited the tower, Castian had told her about the instability of Persilian's power on the first day he appeared in the tower. He had had a hard time controlling the mana that spilled out of him in an instant. Little Persilian, who had lost his mother, was filled with a sense of evil. It took him a year to calm his mana. Sir Millard told his assistant about his worries about Persilian's condition. All 4 years on this day, His Majesty has used magic to go to the Western Palace despite the rainy weather. But this year, he is powerless. He sits by the burnt palace and gets wet. At the end of the tale, Sir bowed to Ellen Fiella and asked her to spend this difficult time with Persilian. Liffey, without hesitation, packed up and set off into the forest to see the emperor. On the way to the Western Palace, Liffey saw a small silhouette sitting by a tree and began to worry about Persilian's condition, for it was raining and quite chilly. The girl approached the emperor and reprimanded him for his light clothing with great care. He got a little angry with her and told her not to treat him like a small child. Liffey handed Persilian his favorite cape and reminded him of the celebration tomorrow, where he must be healthy. As she put the cape on the baby, Liffey was glad to see that he was warmer. Ellen Fiella wrapped herself in her cloak and sat down abruptly beside Persilian, but he was confused by the act. He realized that Sir Millard had told her of the events of that night and had asked her to sit with him. The girl admitted that she knew about the story. She also said that she had prepared herself as much as possible for this sitting under the tree and took out gloves, a scarf, and various snacks. Persilian asked the aide why they were making such a fuss. After all, he had just been away from the palace for a few hours and was also on the palace grounds. Liffey explained to the emperor just as Millard had told her, that he used to be able to protect himself from the rain and cold with magic, but now, in her absence, his seer protects him. Seeing her assistant's wet look, Persilian asked her to go back, but Liffey refused to do so, for she wanted to share his bitter thoughts. His Majesty felt that Fiella shouldn't worry about him since he wasn't going to do anything wrong. Liffey replied that she just wanted to sit next to him. Persilian smiled and said that Liffey was very stubborn. He thought for a moment and went on to say that he should have been just as stubborn on that unfortunate day. Liffey questioned him about it, but he realized he had said too much and said nothing, looking sadly at the old palace. Persilian told the girl that his old house used to seem huge to him, but as Percy grew up, the palace became tiny to him. He did not understand how he and his mother could live there. The story goes on to say that while searching for information about that day, Fiella learned the name of Persilian's mother. Her name was Belia. It could not be found even in the imperial family tree. It was accidentally discovered by Liffey in the notes about the Western Palace. There were no servants or helpers in that palace, and only occasional deliveries of food and household items. But gradually, Liffey found a record that included a petition for things for a growing child. As if by mistake, this sheet was signed with Belia's name rather than the name of the Western Palace. The girl did not understand how a priestess from the temple could meet and mate with the emperor, how she could survive with a child in a palace smaller than a chapel, and why she died in a fire the day before Persilian's birthday. All of these questions kept Fiella in suspense. Through the silence, Persilian whispered to Liffey that his mother would have been happier if he had not been in this world. The life-ruined emperor thought that everything would have been different if his mother had not met the emperor, had not given birth to Persilian by him. The deep feelings of the little one's resentment tugged at Fiella's soul. She was surprised that the man, hours before the national congratulations, would sit and think that life would have been better without him. Liff concluded that Persilian felt this way all the time after his mother's death. The girl tried to get the emperor to talk, thus soothing his broken heart. She began to speculate about what would have happened to Belia's life in the absence of her son. Percy replied that his mother had always dreamed of opening her own workshop, for she was a craftswoman who embroidered and created various jewelry. Persilian took out his found bracelet and showed it to Liffey. It turned out that this bracelet used to belong to his mother. She had made it herself. Because of her son's high interest, she decided to give him this bracelet. Persilian gave it to Liffey and told him that in the beginning the stone was blue in color, but gradually it began to fade. It had the power of prayer in it. It was Mother's special hobby. When she became a priest, she created such things as gifts. Those who received such a gift were very happy. However, after Persilian was born, she stopped creating. Persilian lowered his gaze to the ground and said that his mother had given this bracelet away with the words that she would give him a new one for his birthday. But in the end, Percy didn't get one. Fiella hadn't realized before that the emperor had been thinking for about 4 years now that he could have changed everything, and that it would have been better without his existence. She explained to Perry that his mother could have had the same thoughts and doubts. She could have opened her workshop and lived an ordinary life, but in the end, she valued her son more than anything and was willing to give him anything. The girl leaned over to the emperor and asked him to avoid such foolish thoughts on the anniversary of her mother's death. Persilian listened to the aide and thought for a moment. His Majesty whispered that he didn't want to lose anyone else. He tried to broach the subject of Liffey, but when he was interrupted, he was embarrassed and asked to return to the palace. On the way home, Liff offered to bring His Majesty some warm soup before going to bed, for he needed to warm up after being out in the cold for so long. Persilian didn't mind, which surprised Liff, since the emperor had always refused her obsessive care before. She was going to visit him, even if he refused. The girl told the emperor that the Archduchess had come to the palace in the afternoon and asked her if the emperor would be at the birthday party. She also mentioned a false prediction, which now needed to be confirmed. But Persilian was not interested in listening to her, and said so. Liffey complained to Percy that she did not like the threats made by the Archduchess during his absence. She also asked the emperor to finish the imperial letter at a late supper and allow her to enter the east side of the hall with it tomorrow. Persilian wanted to compliment Liffey, but he was interrupted by Ellen Fiella, who saw Sir Millard still waiting outside the palace. She showed the knight the sign of success and winked happily. The young men returned to the palace. Little Hammon was waiting for them in Persilian's room, and he was not happy about Ellen Fiella's absence. Persilian himself was puzzled when he saw what was happening. Sir Millard had the courage to tell the audience that he was the one who had allowed the baby to sleep in His Majesty's room because he had been capricious. After these words, Hammon suggested that Persilian switch beds because he wanted to sleep on something softer. The emperor rebuked the little one for not being in his room and asked him why he had done so. Hammon replied that he wanted to give him a birthday present. Persilian refused and simply asked the kid to behave culturally so as not to spoil the future celebration. Hammon's anger was not long in coming. The little boy was not pleased that His Majesty was turned out by his gift. He asked Persilian to make a wish and took out of his pocket a gemstone stolen from a statue in the temple and gave it to Percy. Seeing Ellen Fiella's nervousness, the emperor ordered her to tell the truth. The girl began to tell the story of the missing stone, but suddenly Hammon interrupted her. Hammon yelled at the emperor for not thanking him for the gift of the stone. The kid's anger made the room glow red and blue, even blinding Liffey. The kid threw the stone sharply and it shattered into small pieces on the floor. A moment later, the fortune teller saw the broken gift on the floor. She tried to put the small pieces back together and began to reprimand Hammon for his transgression. For once in the carriage, he had promised her to return the stone to the statue after a short time of use. Suddenly, a miracle happened. Emperor Persilian returned to the body of a grown man. He looked at his hands and opened his mouth in surprise. Liffey and Millard were also in mild shock at what had happened. Everyone present was sure that the curse had been lifted and everything was over. However, Hammon laughed and explained to Persilian that he had returned him to his former state only temporarily. Shortly before the emperor's birthday, Hammon's fire energy had increased, so he was able to return Percy to his former state for exactly 24 hours. Little Hammon fell abruptly into a drowsy state, for he had expended too much energy. Persilian reprimanded him for not using his magical powers properly. The little man fell back into anger as he expected an expression of gratitude from the emperor. But instead he received another rebuke. After a moment, Sikar forgave Persilian and fell abruptly asleep. Opening his eyes, Hammon told the emperor that the moment he had made the wish, he had asked for everything to be returned to normal. Percy nodded reluctantly, but the little man added that he was obliged to fulfill it, since it was the wish of two people. Persilian looked sharply at Liffey, which made her lower her gaze in embarrassment. The girl thought that at that moment, the emperor was thinking about what punishment to choose for her because of the prolonged joke. After all, she had never been able to help him. Persilian approached the assistant, gently placed his hand on her head, and told her that she was much shorter than he had realized. But Liffey did not think herself short. On the contrary, it was she who had underestimated His Majesty's stature. Persilian pressed down on Liff and whispered with a peculiar sentiment that she was small. Ellen Fiella didn't understand what was going on or why the emperor was acting so strangely. The next day was the birthday of His Majesty Persilian. At the feast in honor of this celebration, the nobles saw a strange apparition. The following summarizes the entire 3-month situation in the palace. With the appearance of the prince, the aristocrats patiently waited for the opportunity to become his regents. But the prince was not easily deceived by cunning tricks. He possessed the ability to decide matters of state. Since all the official and significant events for the state, such as Holy Day and Empire Foundation Day, were going well, some people said that it was all a drawn-out joke of His Majesty, and he was in the palace the whole time. But at the feast, the people saw the empty throne. As a result, looking back over the past year, the aristocrats came to the unanimous conclusion that Emperor Persilian had decided to abdicate and hand over the affairs of state to his heir. During the celebration, the aristocrats were discussing the current situation, one of the results of which would be the appearance of a new emperor in the person of Prince Perry. They all whispered and hinted to each other that a regent might soon appear in the palace. Suddenly, one of the aristocrats called out that the fortune teller had seen a vision the other day, which said that today, during the celebration, the spirit of the emperor would appear from the east side of the hall. Another nobleman emphasized that Prince Perry believes in this prediction very strongly because he ordered the servants to put his father's throne in the ceremonial hall. The man hopes that all the people will see His Majesty today, otherwise it will be a big disappointment. The conversation was interrupted by a surprised cry from one of the knights. He saw His Majesty Priscillian entering from the east side of the hall. The emperor entered the hall, greeted the guests, and sat down on the throne. Afterwards, he resented the surprise of the people. He said that his presence was obligatory, for everyone had gathered for the purpose of wishing him a happy birthday. He also noted that everyone looked at him with a strange look, as if they had seen someone who was not supposed to appear. Liffey watched the reaction of the aristocrats who rushed to congratulate His Majesty. She realized that the people had a very different attitude towards Prince Perry. The aristocrats were still able to show their joy at the emperor's appearance. It turns out that his bad reputation remains only at the level of rumors. The Archduchess Dipka arrived to greet and congratulate His Majesty. She did not show much joy at this meeting. Modestly wishing the emperor long life, she wanted to leave, but Priscillian suddenly spoke to her. The lady asked him where he had been for so long, to which the emperor told her not to entertain false hopes. These words caused the Archduchess to change in her face, and she said that she had no bad thoughts on the subject. She was worried about the problems that had arisen during His Majesty's long absence. The emperor stopped the altercation and tried to act proudly with the unwanted interlocutor. Liffey noted his behavior for the better, for the emperor had been known as a boor before. The Archduchess asked to see Prince Perry, and Ellen Fiella brought the child wrapped in a cloak to Priscillian. The lady was embarrassed that the baby's face was hidden, so she asked to see it. The emperor showed his aunt the prince, and she opened her mouth in surprise. She explained that until today, she had thought that Prince Perry and His Majesty were completely different, but today's meeting had shown her otherwise. In fact, instead of a prince, it was little Haman, who briefly used Priscillian's manifested magic mana and incarnated into the image of the little emperor. In return, Priscillian promised to call him the Great Emperor for the rest of the time. The little one immediately agreed to this arrangement. However, there was a great danger that the cloaking magic would dissipate due to its minimal level, so a mission was undertaken to quickly disappear the child from the ball. After showing the baby, His Majesty announced to all present that little Perry was very tired and had caught a cold in preparation for the feast, so he needed to go on vacation. He gave the baby to his assistant Elaine and continued the celebration. The Archduchess, as always, was against the emperor's decision and admonished him. She believed that the prince had put too much effort into preparing for the event, and therefore he had every right to be present at the celebration. In response to Auntie, Priscillian said that she was paying too much attention to his child, and it was quite strange for her. He suggested that she take care of her condition and leave the lounge. The mistress was hurt by his words and left. There was a commotion in the hall. The aristocrats were excitedly discussing something and, having made up their minds, approached His Majesty. They prepared small gifts for the emperor, including children's toys and children's clothes. However, His Majesty did not like the gifts intended for the prince. He realized that the nobles were not expecting him to appear at the celebration, so they wanted to slip the gifts to Prince Perry. The nobles were justified in thinking that a satisfied and happy prince would surely make the young father happy. One of the aristocrats distinguished himself and gave the emperor a pink diamond rattle, saying that this was the gift that Mrs. Liffey had recommended to him, and he himself was sure that such a toy would please the sweetest prince. Priscillian told the lord that the prince refused such onerous gifts, for it was more like a bribe than a gift given from the heart. The man tried to convey to the ruler that he was wrong, but he failed. His Majesty explained that he had warned Ellen Fiella about possible bribes. Liffey was reluctant to part with the expensive bribes, but still confirmed Priscillian's words that the gift was too onerous. Looking at the disappointed faces of the aristocrats, the emperor told them of his displeasure over the many gifts that had piled up in the palace during his absence. He concluded that those present were trying to manipulate the little prince and his guardian, but the guests unanimously said that this was not true. Persilian threw the diamond toy on the floor and said that he had doubts about the aristocrat's sincerity. He explained that there were individuals who did not consider the prince's refusal, so they continued to come and give gifts. The gentleman who presented the expensive rattle realized that His Highness was alluding to him. The emperor invited him to go to the balcony with him to avoid similar situations in the future. Liffey was to go along with him. Hearing this conversation, Liffey realized why the emperor is considered a tyrant by everyone, for even by ear his words are frightening. It must be hard for the aristocrats in this fight. On their way to the balcony, Elenfiela and Persilian saw the arrival of Castian Haydar. The Duke bowed to greet His Majesty and openly showed his joy at his presence. In return, the emperor thanked the young man for attending the celebration despite his father's worsening illness. Castian asked about the prince's whereabouts, and Persilian let him know that the prince would not appear at the feast again due to increased fatigue and ill health. The Duke said that he had been very worried about the prince's condition lately. The emperor thanked Castian for taking special care of the heir. Sir replied that it was his duty as a member of Haydar, for his family had lived for the sake of the imperial family all their existence. After loudly thanking the emperor, Castian asked him if he had finally returned. Persilian replied that it would soon be necessary for him to go away. The previous trip had left him with many new matters and concerns about the state that he could not solve while in the palace. His Majesty explained that the child was doing an excellent job, and Liffey was also doing an excellent job of bringing all the news and problems of the capital to the emperor. Liffey became enraged at the words she heard. Elenfiela rebuked Persilian for not having arranged this situation beforehand. According to legend, Liffey didn't communicate with His Highness so that she wouldn't tell anyone anything unnecessary. After the words spoken by the emperor, Liffey wouldn't be able to brazenly lie in the Archduchess's face. Frowning, His Majesty leaned over to Liff and reminded her that she had made up the story about Prince Perry as a separation-afflicted toddler without consent. The emperor also reminded the aide of the diamond gifts she had begged for from the aristocrats. Persilian explained to the people that he was the one who asked Elenfiela not to reveal that she was in touch with him, and also asked them to keep everything going on inside the palace a secret. Thanks to that, the palace was so peaceful. The emperor looked at the crowd of aristocrats with fiery eyes and said that he was aware that some of the people were trying to capture Liffey and find out his location. He hinted for people to hide their curiosity, for it might play against them. From the whole situation, Castian concluded that Liffey was quite close to His Majesty, as there was minimal distance between them during the conversation. The girl justified it by saying that she was the guardian of the Empire's main child, so she was content to be close to his father. Liffey also added that she was giving the Emperor all the information he needed regarding the state of affairs in the palace. Hoping that Castian would stop asking stupid questions, Liffey exhaled. Castian asked the keeper another question regarding the emperor's absence during the fire in the main palace. The lady replied that it was a normal observance of the rules of the emperor's upbringing. His Majesty teaches the prince that only the strongest survive in this world. Castian praised such a rule. At the end of the conversation, Castian noted that the emperor's mana was faint this time. The Duke had felt a strong spirit and aggression every time he'd seen His Majesty, but the feeling was different now. Castian ranked second in magic mastery, and so Liffey began to worry about the mystery of Persilian. She stroked Castian's cheek and reminded him that the Emperor had recently lost a loved one, and so his powers were much weaker. Castian agreed with that thought. Liffey stroked Castian's face, which made him feel special. He offered the girl a dance, but she didn't want to dance and didn't know how to refuse. Suddenly, Liffey heard His Majesty's call, which suddenly broke the conversation between the young men. Persilian took the girl under his arms and told her to go and tend to Perry, whose condition had become much worse. Liffey was glad she was going. In parting, Persilian told Duke Castian that the hall was full of girls who would like to dance with him. The emperor wished his guest a good evening and left. As they went out into the courtyard with the emperor, Liffey reproached him for always being against made-up stories, but today he had taken advantage of it himself. Percy replied that he was just trying to save her from an intrusive suitor. Liffey remembered the past situation in the carriage, when Persilian had tried to pull her hair out, and thanked him happily for saving her. Sensing the emperor's jealousy, Elenfiela decided to change the subject and asked about Sir Millard's absence. His Majesty explained to the girl that the knight was near Hammon, who had become unwell due to the dispelling of magic. Recalling the day's events, Persilian asked Liffey where she had gone for a long time. The aide explained to the lord that she had spent the entire day attending to the nuances of preparing an outfit for His Majesty, and afterward had gone to make a surprise for him. Elenfiela took out of her pocket a bracelet she had made herself and gave it to Percy. She explained that she had tried to pray over it and promised to make another one later. The emperor was embarrassed about such a gift. In honor of Persilian's birthday, Liffey decided to predict his future. She pretended that a vision was coming to her and went on to say that he would succeed. In response, Percy told Liffey that when he looked at her, he wanted to believe in those predictions because he could see that she was there for him. The next moment, the emperor whispered that he felt like he was possessed, like some foolish rulers in history. Liffey listened to Persilian in silence, not knowing what he was talking about. His Majesty removed a strand of hair from Liffey's face, covered her eyes with his palm, and gently leaned his head against her forehead. At this moment, he asked her why she kept making him feel so special and precious. A confused Liff couldn't answer that question. The emperor quickly turned away and ran away. The girl tried to stop him but stumbled. Persilian managed to catch her in his arms. She looked into his eyes and saw certain feelings in them. Persilian lit up with firepower and returned to his previous state. He was surprised that the magic had disappeared so quickly, for it was not yet midnight. Liffey suggested he hide as soon as possible, and he agreed. Liffey took little Percy in her arms and returned with him to the palace. At Haemon's bedside, they saw the sleeping baby and a tired Sir Millard. Liffey let Sir Millard rest and said she could take care of Sikar herself. After taking Sikar to her room, Liffey returned to Persilian to say goodnight. She saw that His Majesty stood brooding and saddened by the situation. The girl did not bother him and went to bed. Elenfiela analyzed the day's events before going to sleep, and she could not get the moment with Persilian in the courtyard out of her mind. Her heart was beating fast at the mere memory of it. After a while, she was able to calm down and fall asleep. The whole story of Persilian de Eckhart's complicated life is told below. It was complicated by the fact that his birth was not a blessed one, for he was born of a chance affair between a priestess and an emperor. The emperor, who was circumspect, refused to care for a woman whom the Pope in anger had struck off the list of clergymen. When the empress's family voiced their displeasure about Belia, he gave her the most remote palace in the imperial castle and never visited her again. Little Persilian did not know his real name for a long time, for the emperor had given him a name very late in life, and his mother was unwilling to call him by such a name. She treated him simply, calling him child. It was this word that Percy first thought of as his name. Belia in the baby's eyes looked like a person who seemed to care for him forcibly and reluctantly. Belia was the only person the baby had been with since birth, so it was natural for him to think that she was his family. As a child, Persilian followed his mother everywhere and asked her a lot of silly questions that she didn't want to answer. It was strange for a small child to see the differences in hair and eye color. In fact, Belia did not want to call Persilian by his real name, which the emperor had given, for she was afraid of becoming attached to him like a child who would hope to receive warmth and motherly love from her. Persilian always thought his mom was strong, because she seemed so big to him. But one night he went to her room and saw a terrible picture that stuck in his mind. Belia was sitting on the floor, weeping and asking God about her miserable life. Little Persilian had only seen his mother in such a state once before, but he knew at once that she cried like this every night. The sight of a strong being collapsing before his eyes and crying frightened him. The realization came to him that this destruction had been happening all along. That same night, a weeping Persilian went to his mother, grabbed her by her clothes, and began to beg. He sobbed, and in between tried to apologize to God for his guilt, for he did not think his mother was guilty of anything. It was the first time little Percy had fainted from crying and shock. Before Persilian lost consciousness, he felt Belia gently stroking his back, telling him that it wasn't his fault. After that night, Belia began to feel better about her child. Percy began to notice that she began to care for him little by little. Percy knew from an early age that his mother was uncomfortable around him. That was why the slight change in her condition had disturbed Persilian greatly. He tried to pick up on the notes of increased attention and always listened several times to the stories his mother read to him. Looking back from the distant future, Persilian realizes that at that valuable time for them, they simply sympathized with each other, and so their relationship improved greatly. Unfortunately, Belia only read fairy tales. She could not tell her son stories about her life. Even if something special came up during a conversation, the topic never continued. Persilian always watched his mother's facial expressions carefully, so he never insisted on continuing the story if he saw that she felt uncomfortable. It seemed to the little boy that he was the cause of whatever had torn the young woman away from the quiet times of the past, and that was indeed the case. One day, some people came to the Western Palace. They pointed their fingers at the building and mockingly compared it to an old, small warehouse. These people didn't understand how someone could live in such a house. They were children with blonde hair and eyes as red as fire. Persilian realized at once who they were. Belia always taught her child what was worth knowing about the imperial family and actions to beware of. At an early age, the baby learned what he should not do. Suddenly, the 4 children of the imperial family came to the Western Palace again. Having learned the rules of etiquette, little Persilian bowed his head and bowed to the uninvited guests. He was quite embarrassed by the visit of his siblings. The children were surprised by his behavior. In response to the kind gesture, they said it was unnecessary, for they were not going to show him respect. The princess pointed out that Persilian was turning up his nose because he belonged to the imperial family, but he shouldn't do that because he was illegitimate. Such encounters with imperial children were quite frequent. The boys wanted to somehow provoke a reaction from him, so each time they bullied him, tripping him up and insulting him in the process. Every time Persilian returned dirty from the street late at night, Belia would get very upset about his condition. Self-destruction and anger were beginning to show, and she felt intense anger towards the imperial family. After all the child's unfortunate walks, Belia would take him by the hand and beg for forgiveness for what had happened. But Persilian pretended not to understand and excused the imperial children, saying that he had soiled himself. He had learned this innocent attitude from his mother. It was obvious that the imperial family wanted the little boy and Belia out of the palace. The children were counting on the fact that the mild Persilian would never be able to fight back, and his mother even less so they did vicious things at such a very young age. Persilian had always been critical of the imperial family. After all, when during the baptism of their youngest daughter, the other children bullied him, the emperor did not know about it. The children played the role of noble people in the eyes of their parents, but in reality, they were doing real stupid things. Persilian feared only to be abandoned by Belia. He, like his mother, did not like the temple or the imperial family. It even made him laugh at how stupid they were. In time, Belia realized that her child was suffering. From then on, she began to talk little by little about herself and her past life, touching on topics about the temple and her life before it. During the story, she often touched the blue bracelet and fingered it. One day, she saw a child's interested look and asked him if he wanted the same bracelet. The child was silent. Belia took off her bracelet and put it on Persilian's arm, promising him that next time she would give him a new bracelet, which she would also make with her own hands. Persilian asked his mother when this next time would be. She replied that when his birthday came. She added that it was in the winter. For the first time, little 9-year-old Percy looked forward to his birthday. On Persilian's past birthdays, there had always been a silent agreement between son and mother. Belia had always suffered on that day, So the baby wanted nothing. But this day was to be different. Over the past year, Percy had finally been able to bond with Belia. The stories of the past she told gradually became more and more. Persilian also got a glimpse into her personal space where he had never been. It was a room she used. He had never been able to go there before, but he had been there several times this year. When Persilian entered his mother's room, he saw that she was writing a letter to someone. Belia explained to her son that the letter was addressed to an old friend who could help them. Persilian thought that such a person did not exist, for he and his mother had been forgotten by everyone. At the age of 9, Percy comes up with a plan for him and his mother to move elsewhere. After all, the imperial family was in a hurry to wipe them out in this horrible city anyway. The little boy thought it would be best if he went to the emperor himself and asked his permission to move. Persilian often imagined moving with his mother to another place where they could be completely happy. He thought he could beg the emperor for such a future. After the dream appeared, Perry began to ignore the taunts and threats from the imperial children, for he hoped that soon he would not be here, and they would continue to live here, living their carefree childhood. Little Persilian thought that the siblings were incapable of committing any evil deed, but he was seriously mistaken. At that time, he could not even imagine what these noble children were capable of. The day before Percy's birthday, Belia returned from the forest and found that she had forgotten her book there. She asked her son to go and fetch it, and he agreed. He really wanted to go there with her, but his mother refused. Persilian searched all the places where his mother had been, but the book was not there. Along the way, he also looked for the very bracelet his mother had given him at the beginning of the year. It had been a long time, and the little boy decided to return home empty-handed. Persilian thought about his dream of moving, but his thoughts were abruptly cut short. In the distance of the forest, he saw a bright orange light. He realized that his home was that way. Running to the house, the little boy saw that the palace was completely engulfed in fire. Near the burning building stood a company of imperial children who did not immediately realize what they had done. At midnight that same night, little Persilian had a mana awakening. The records of that time were quite strange. It was written that there was a typhoon-like wind blowing in the western forest and a heavy rain that poured down as if from a hole in the sky. People believed that trouble had come to the city, but the great mage of the imperial palace noticed that it was a surge of mana and discovered a child standing in the midst of the turmoil. He had red, burning mana that flowed all over his body. This child was someone who could create an empire and destroy it. Persilian spent the next 10 years in the magic tower. He couldn't control his mana for over a year. It wasn't just because he was living for revenge against the imperial family, but because he was tormented by guilt. Persilian was tormented by the thought that if he had returned early, he might have been able to save his mother. He thought that he should not have gone, that he should have stayed. But if, because of his stubbornness, he had not left the palace that day, he might have died with his mother. At first glance, his regrets reminded him of self-loathing. But on the one hand, despite these regrets, Persilian wanted to know the truth about the situations his mother had been accused of. During his 10 years of study in the Tower of Magic, Persilian had learned a great deal and had finally found the key to the whole story. He learned how Belia had met the emperor, whether it was coincidence or chance. At the age of 19, at the end of the year, Persilian returned to the imperial palace. It was still a terrible place for him, and the behavior of the emperor, who could not look his son in the eye, made the prince laugh. It was also strange for Percy to see the friendly faces of his siblings. They were uncomfortable looking at his brother, but their faces remained as angry as they had been as children. About 6 months later, the emperor made his illegitimate son the third heir. That's what Persilian wanted. He had achieved the right to the throne through his magical abilities, having once helped people remove landslides. On the occasion of recognizing yet another heir, the empress invited Persilian to a family dinner, which was held among the closest of friends. Persilian hated the prince and princesses, but in his heart, he hoped that the grown children had long since reflected and regretted what they had done. The way they looked at Percy suggested that they felt guilty about their childhood, but that was not the case. During an imperial dinner, Persilian choked and discovered that there was poison in his food. The princesses made a frightened appearance at being exposed. Naive Persilian realized that this was not an invitation to their family. They just wanted to remove an obstacle in their way, since Persilian had been given the right to inherit the throne. Coughing, Percy stated to the imperial family that he wanted to give them a chance, for he thought the children had grown up and gotten smarter. But no, the mana had reasserted itself as he spoke. On the same day, the centuries-old palace was completely engulfed in huge flames. This was the first incident in which Persilian Eckhart was dubbed as a tyrant. After killing his siblings, Persilian entered the palace and killed the emperor of the time. That night, the entire empire shook in horror. When Persilian ascended the throne, the aristocrats tried to reproach him in every way possible. One day, the nobleman Marquis Bagot told the young emperor that his behavior was not permissible. On the same day, he was beheaded by the emperor. After the new emperor came to the throne, the imperial power skyrocketed considerably. The aristocrats who criticized him changed their attitude towards him drastically, but Persilian didn't care about that. Persilian knew the story of how Belia had confronted the previous emperor one night. Decades later, Persilian was able to find out that Marquis Bagot was involved. Even so, the Marquis also spoke out against Belia's affair with the emperor, and thanks to him, the servant girl was sent to live in the Western Palace. While searching for the suspicious Marquis Bagot, Persilian came across circumstantial evidence that several priests had suffered at his hands in the past. The clerics had left the temple for various personal reasons, but all of them had been killed on their way home. Persilian caught the Marquis and questioned him, but he said that in 20 years he had forgotten everything about the events of that time. Even before his execution, the Marquis didn't bother to tell the truth. But Bagot confessed to one thing, that he had been involved in the story of Persilian's mother. Without any regret, Persilian killed the Marquis because he thought that there would be no benefit from further pointless interrogation. This act was a warning to all those who had anything to do with these dirty stories. Persilian used all his powers to find the clue. However, he was constantly interrupted by the Archduchess Dipka, with whom he had many conflicts. This annoyed Persilian quite a lot. Before the past emperor ascended the throne, Madame Archduchess went to the kingdom of Uttern, where she lived for about 15 years. When she returned to the empire, the emperor of that time thought that a couple hours would be enough for her to adjust to the empire, but gradually, a magic tower fell into her hands. After Dipka became one of the main people of the tower, she gradually expanded her position in politics and established close ties with the aristocrats. In fact, the Archduchess and Persilian had seen each other only a few times, and their conversations were even fewer. From the moment he became emperor, the mistress began to nag him on any matter. Persilian wanted to find the clue to those fateful events as soon as possible, but the Archduchess kept creating unnecessary obstacles for him. As the emperor's nerves became more and more sensitive, he was rejuvenated and found himself in the body of a 4-year-old toddler. Persilian had a talent for magic and had tried several times to remove the curse, but all attempts came to nothing. And when frustration was at its peak, Sir Millard came to the palace with rumors of a street fortune teller named Liffey. Appearing in the palace, the girl told an unknown story about His Majesty and Cyril. Ordinary people can't easily get information about the princess and the emperor. Therefore, rather out of suspicion, he asked the servants to escort Liff to the palace. After a while, the fortune teller began to talk nonsense, as if he and the emperor should always be together to lift the curse. They were words that Persilian did not believe for a moment. But seeing that the fortune teller knew many facts about him and Cyril, he decided to keep her around. If she caused trouble, he would deal with her at any moment. In just a few days, Percy went from being a formidable emperor to Prince Perry. All of this happened when Liffey was around. At the time, he had seriously considered dealing with the woman, but he still decided to give her one chance. The story of Prince Perry didn't turn out as badly as it had originally seemed. Sometimes the emperor regretted having Liffey around, but most of the time he was glad to have her. Persilian liked Ellen Fiella's persistence. When he was angry and kicked her out of his office, she returned again and again after a while. At the beginning of the story, Liffey looked scared, but at some point she started to smile genuinely at the Emperor. Even if he threatened her with death, she only smiled amusedly. Normally, when in danger, anyone would think of their own safety first, but not in Liffey's situation. Even during the explosion, she didn't hesitate to put herself in danger instead of Persilian. Sometimes Liffey would say out of the blue that she liked Persilian, and he was always puzzled after hearing this. He would ask her the reason for her liking, but she could not give a clear answer. Elenfiela always justified her feelings with a prediction. Persilian did not believe her because he believed that there was no such thing as unconditional love. The love Persilian had previously seen was merely a show of sympathy from loved ones. The fortune teller's every word was questioned, for more than 2 months had passed since her appearance in the palace, and she still hadn't helped lift the Emperor's curse. As the girl's confidence faded, she tried to avoid seeing Persilian. When Persilian sighed silently and complained quietly, she shrank back. Even so, she gently assured him that she was doing her best to find the cursed thing. Gradually, Persilian reduced his questions to the fortune teller and simply watched her in silence. He didn't dislike the girl, but the way she looked at him sadly irritated him for some reason. One day, when Persilian was already used to a carefree life as Prince Perry, a fireball appeared in the imperial palace and created a commotion among the people. Initially, the emperor did not believe in ghost stories, and he found this story particularly amusing. However, in the fireball he encountered in the vicinity of the palace, he sensed divinity rather than negative thoughts. Persilian still didn't understand why the orb had suddenly appeared and disappeared. So, just in case, he quietly searched for the information he needed, in case it reappeared. Before the emperor could find a solution to the situation, news of the ghost's existence quickly spread among the aristocrats. Chaos quickly reigned in the capital, and suspicions of the sanctity of the imperial palace were aroused. Persilian was very well acquainted with this kind of business. For him, asking the nobles to keep the archduchess by his side was a familiar thing. It was just as it had been when he was emperor. This time, the anger of the aristocrats came not only to Persilian, but also to the seeress. They demanded that the prince be isolated from Liffey, a request that was obviously ridiculous. After this situation, Percy was troubled. He was worried because everyone present criticized Liff throughout the meeting. He asked the aide if she was worried about the guest's temper tantrum, but she replied that nothing serious had happened. After Liffey's words, Persilian instantly wiped away the worry that was uncharacteristic of him from his face, repeating to himself that he wasn't the one to take care of anyone. When there was a fire in the main palace, Persilian still showed his feelings. When he saw Liffey running towards the burning building, he ran after her. He was afraid of losing someone to the fire when he was as helpless as he had been then in the past. He was afraid of being crushed by that terrible feeling of helplessness. Persilian was practically out of his mind in that situation. And yet, when the fire flared up again, he continued to cling to his assistant with all his might, just to protect her. As the fire flickered away, without realizing his actions, Percy's first order of business was for the prince to check that his assistant was all right. At that moment, he remembered her words about wanting to protect and keep a valuable person safe. Persilian didn't want to have anything in his life that he could value and cling to. He realized that the road he would take in the future was very thorny. There should be no weaknesses on it. Percy lost everything he held dear. He had lost his mother and his home. He no longer had any intention of giving his heart to anyone. Such feelings were a weakness to him. Persilian had no heart and no feelings to give to Elenfiela, but she clung to his attention again and again each time, not even knowing the path he was on. The day before his birthday, just a few hours later, would be the day when countless people would celebrate his birthday. Only Persilian honored his mother's existence, which had been erased by the Empire. But Sir Millard told the fortune-teller what had happened, and she came to Percy with support. She did not know all the details of that day, for then it would have been awkward for her to come there. Persilian didn't want Liffey to come to the place where he had lost his past life, and even though he told her to leave, she stayed close by. The Emperor could have escorted the aide out if he wanted to, but for some reason he couldn't do so. It wasn't anything special that Persilian did. Not to say he missed her, indulging in memories, nor was he saddened by her loss. He was just crushed with hopeless guilt and regret. He was not relieved that he had killed the entire imperial family that was responsible for her death. He realized that his birth had made Belia an unhappy woman. The guilt had been there for Persilian ever since he found his mother crying at night. He'd always thought she wouldn't have died if he'd been sure of himself. Liffey asked the Emperor an incorrect question, asking what it would be like for his mother to live alone, without him. It was a fantasy he could never have imagined. Liffey's words made Persilian think that Belia would become a rich man if she opened her own bracelet workshop. At the end of this fantasy, Percy became bitter. Belia, who though unsure of herself, could have lived happily ever after, but because she stayed with him, she died. The only thing Persilian can do now is look at the place where she died. Liffey told Percy that maybe each of them cared for the other out of sympathy. Even if Belia dreamed of a different future, in reality she stayed with her son and cared for him until his last days. When the fortune teller told the Emperor that she would give him a bracelet of thread in honor of his birthday, he did not know what to say. At first he wanted to reject her gift, but the thread bracelet, which had come back into his hands, brought back memories of those times. He remembered Belia's face correcting the knot on his wrist. The forgotten face of the smiling man was forever imprinted in his eyes. Persilian didn't understand why Liffey continued to give him support after everything that had happened. He couldn't bear to speak aloud about how he felt at that moment. The swallowed emotions tickled his throat horribly. Percy didn't want to treasure anything, but when Liffey gave him a new bracelet in honor of his birthday, he couldn't contain his feelings. After all, this woman had made him a bracelet from the threads his mother had once held. Liffey, who had been by his side the whole time, who had stayed sitting beside him last night, had forced his will to go against his feelings. At that moment, he finally realized that he didn't want to lose this man. He dared to cover Liffey's eyes and gave her a magical kiss on the forehead. For the tyrant emperor, it was like a brand on his heart. After the emperor's birthday, it was full-fledged winter in the Eckhart Empire. Liffey and Persilian felt relieved, for the weather prevented the nobles from traveling to the palace. The heavy snowfall had become something of a shield for the palace. The public was told that the emperor had gone to see the prince on his birthday and spent several days with him. Under the guise of this reason, the aristocrats were denied an audience. Little Siccar woke up too after the emperor's birthday. Seeing the drifts of snow, he ran outside. Persilian wanted to talk to him about all the problems, but Siccar asked to have all conversations only outside, so everyone went for an unplanned walk. Sicard was wallowing in the snow as if he was seeing snow for the first time in his life. Liffey asked Sir Millard about it. He said that it rarely snows in Sikkim because it is the southern part of the continent. Siccar called out to Liffey and showed her the snow in his hands. He confessed that it was the first time he had touched it, for he had tried to touch snow before, but it had melted immediately because of its fiery power. Siccar had once been a powerful dragon capable of destroying an entire empire, but a curse had allowed him to touch snow for the first time. Persilian approached the little one and asked how he felt about the snowfall he had seen. Little Siccar was delighted. The emperor promised him that if he returned to his former state, he would allow snow to fall in Sekan as well, and that snow would never be melted by fire. The kid opened his mouth with joy, and the emperor added that he would make ice for him as well. There were no reservoirs in Sikkim, but they would appear in the near future with the help of Persilian's magic. It seemed to Liffey that the emperor was giving away promises too easily. As it turned out, all the promises were made for a reason. Persilian asked the little boy how he could break the curse, for there must be a way that would return everything to its former state. Siccar said that he was able to return Percy to his original state because of the fact that on the emperor's birthday his fire had intensified. Siccar added that nothing was impossible, but at that moment he used a bound relic. Persilian asked what he should bring to break the curse. Ellen Fiella turned pale as she heard the conversation. She realized that Persilian was going to participate in the theft of the shrines, just as little Siccar had done earlier. Taking advantage of the situation, the kid approached the emperor and offered to play with him and make a snowman in return for answering all his questions. Liffey and a disgruntled Perseolian started rolling balls for the snowman. Percy said he wasn't interested in doing such things, but he had no other choice. Siccar offered to play snowballs. Persilian got angry and asked him to answer questions. The kid said that the curse problem could be solved quickly by getting rid of the middleman, but that part he couldn't help with. It was in his power only to return Percy briefly to his original appearance. Siccar added that he can't use his abilities often because the Emperor's energy is unstable. In addition to fire, Persilian's body also contains his mother's energy. Liffey told the toddler that the Emperor's mom was a priest. The little one was surprised and said that this energy was different from that of ordinary priests. Siccar told Persilian that the curse only draws on his energy. He could easily release it and then it would be over. Percy says his energy is suppressed. The Emperor asked the kid why he himself was still unable to help himself back to his previous state. Siccar explained that by using a lot of mana, he would fall into a trap. He would go beyond the line he was confined to, for Simeon had sealed him in Sakina. Persilian realized that Siccar could do nothing but mess with his head. He offered to let the little boy stay in the ice palace he had built for him and buried him there in anger. Unexpectedly, Siccar jumped out of the pile of snow and shouted that it was possible to use the Ardals. One of them must take on Siccar's power, sharing it with him, and then the curse could be broken without crossing the line. Persilian said the Ardals would not appear until next year, but Siccar said he sensed their presence in the Empire. He had tried to find this Ardal himself, but so far nothing had come of it. Everyone returned to the palace. Liffey told Persilian that it would be a good idea to leave Siccar in a child's body after the curse, since Sir Millard takes such good care of him. He reminds him of his dead brother. Persilian didn't understand the assistant, for it seemed to him that Siccar always looked like a child because of the curse. Liffey explained that he had used the image of a child on purpose because it was more comfortable. It goes on to tell us that the Ardal is chosen by means of a 10-day test. First, only priests can take the exam. The candidate must attest to his knowledge and purity of sacred power, including basic doctrines, theology, history of religion, and the words of the saints. Siccar became curious about the selection process of the Ardals, and so he and Liffey came to the temple, under the pretext of Haemon's studies at the temple. The bishop personally took on the task of educating the little boy. He wanted to raise him to be the next supreme pontiff. Ever since Siccar entered the temple, the bishop has had a smile on his face. Sacred vows are engraved on the floor in the column of the temple fountain. When a candidate dips his hand into the water and the vow glows blue, the true Ardal is in front of the fountain. It is believed that the water itself rose from the fountain when the superb Ardal appeared. Liffey began to worry about her lies. Ardals have high divinity. Their eyes see everything. If an Ardal appears at the exam, Ellen Fiella should leave the temple quickly, lest the truth come out. The bishop said that the Ardal who was able to raise the water from the fountain died on the way to the temple. Having inherited the power, he prayed for about 10 days, then went to the temple, and on the way, he threw himself off the bridge with the carriage. The Lord added that an Ardal is selected every 12 years, but the death of an Ardal was unusual, and so a new selection test was conducted a couple of years later. According to rumors, this was Simeon's punishment. The priest escorted the guests back. On the way, Liffey asked Siccar if he could use his powers with the Ardal. Liffey asked Siccar if he could use his powers with the Ardal. Once the curse was broken, Prince Perry would disappear forever. Liffey didn't understand how they would explain his whereabouts to people. She also realized that she would be sad because she wouldn't see the Emperor in such a cute image again. On the way home, Liffey asked Siccar about his brooding look. He explained to her that the priest had mentioned the death of the Ardal, which had happened 100 years ago. Siccar waited for him to come, but when he did not, he fell into slumber.